The terrible story happened to the main character for the third time, and each time everything was repeated over and over again, without the possibility of fixing anything. Her faithful maid lay on the floor in a pool of blood, trying so desperately to protect her mistress. But no matter how events unfolded, the main character was killed again, and this was probably a tragic fate that could not be changed. Even when she decided to leave her past life behind and start anew, taking a completely different path, the same outcome awaited her. Even when she forced her family to repent and live in pious poverty so that no one could covet their wealth, Novelita died again. At the last moment of her life, she invariably hears someone's bitter, plaintive voice, and this time she finally understood that everything was inevitable. Probably the Almighty wants retribution, and the heroine will never be able to escape from the cycle of her unfortunate fate. Lying in a pool of her own blood, she was once again stuck in this miserable and endless stream of death and rebirth, all because their vile family was finally overtaken by cruel karma, and in this life, she wanted to do everything to destroy the family relationship, just to get out of this unfortunate loop. The sun shone over the palace, generously scattering golden sparks across its stone walls. The rays emphasized the carved balconies, high arches, and graceful bas-reliefs. The quiet voice of the maid was heard this morning, and she was whispering, trying to wake up her lady. She repeated her name several times, but the girl still did not wake up, and only came to when she called her Lady Herencia. The green-eyed, cheerful maid was finally happy, because Milady had finally woken up, which meant that her efforts had not been in vain. She wished the lady good morning, and the main character was the beloved youngest daughter in the family of Duke Novelita, named Herencia Novelita. The maid's name was Agnes, and she happily offered to fill a hot bath or bring a delicious aromatic breakfast straight away. But Milady woke up in a strange mood, as if she did not understand what was happening, cautiously looking around. Herencia looked closely at the maid, trying to understand what was going on here and why she had woken up again. Agnes's eyes widened to incredible sizes, because every morning Milady behaved completely differently. But now the heroine understood what was going on here. She was reborn again, her fourth life began, and the cycle of life and death was started again. Looking at the kind servant, she understood that Agnes certainly did not deserve to die because of her, but every time she died in terrible agony next to her. Agnes reported that a letter had arrived for Milady, which she should read and reply to as soon as possible. Come to think of it, a letter came then too, and every time she returned she received letters from the same person. Herencia ignored the strange letters, but now she asked the maid to get ready to leave, because this time she was going to do everything differently. In her new life, Herencia was going to become the most infamous villain in the Empire and lead her family to complete destruction and chaos. Early in the morning, a man was waiting for her, who, upon seeing my lady, immediately admitted that all this was extremely unexpected. The man with a plump, pig-like face admired the lady's face and figure, and that she definitely suited his taste. Laughing, the lady only thought, "This psycho is talking complete nonsense," and just the expression on his face disgusted her. The man stood up and loudly declared that he loved his lady with all his heart and was ready to do anything for her. All the guests present in the cafe paid attention to the actions of this madman, because his loud screams attracted attention. Herencia realized that this was her perfect chance, declaring that men and nonsense about love only because of a girl's beautiful appearance are completely superficial and they are extremely disgusting to her. In the cafe, in front of everyone, Lady Herencia poured a mug of coffee on a man's disgusting, plump face, wishing to become a real villain. There was silence all around, broken only by the frightened whispers of the visitors, and Herencia stood with her chin raised high, an undisguised triumph dancing in her eyes. The man did not expect the girl to act this way, and she said that besides carelessly talking about her beautiful figure on the first meeting, this is an insult of the highest degree. In her hands, she held a piece of chocolate cake, which would also probably fly straight into the face of the impudent fat man. Then she didn't just throw it, but rather launched the masterpiece of confectionery art right into the man's brazenly grinning face. She wanted her name to be whispered in fear and admiration, not spoken with contemptuous condescension, and she knew she had to cross the line and become the one everyone would fear. Herencia stood like a statue, with her head held high and a flame of anger in her eyes, certain that this man would now definitely hate her. The gentleman had an incredibly expensive suit, or rather she joked that she would have to send a check for the laundry to his residence, and even thought about giving the money right then. She knew that this act would not remain without consequences, but now she didn't care. But the enraged man decided to swing at the girl in front of everyone. She certainly didn't expect this, and proudly closed her eyes. Well, at that moment she finally felt the taste of freedom. The man only had time to swing his hand when a stranger appeared in front of the lady and furiously grabbed him by the neck. She screamed that this man was like a vile demon, whose rudeness no one could compare to. The lady had no idea who the girl was that appeared before her, but she felt as if she knew this man. The lady screamed. The fool had already cheated on her once, and now he had found himself another passion, whom he admired in front of everyone. It turned out that she was getting married to this impudent fellow literally in a month, and he only asked Victoria to give him the opportunity to explain everything, assuring her that she had misunderstood everything. Victoria shouted that everything was quite clear here, and there was nothing to invent because everyone had heard how this man confessed his sympathy to her. The ladies of the aristocratic circle froze with their mouths half open, and the gentlemen, forgetting about gallantry, only stared in amazement at what was happening. There really were too many witnesses in the cafe who saw everything perfectly well, and Mr. Stein fully justified his dirty reputation. Stein, having recovered from the initial shock, tried to maintain a semblance of composure, but from under the sliding cream from the cake, a treacherously evil grimace appeared. Herencia never thought that things would turn out this way, but it looks like now these two won't have any wedding because of her. But at that moment, she was only happy, because now both sides would blame her, and she would finally become the main villain of the novel. She didn't care at all about their future. They could argue as much as they wanted, after all, she was just a stranger, but suddenly Victoria declared that Lady Herencia was right. The heroine did not even suspect that Victoria would stand up for her and take her side, accusing her failed husband of betrayal. Victoria's face was incredibly happy, and she called the lady her savior, thanks to whom she managed to escape a terrible marriage. She thanked the lady for her worthy deed, and Herencia, asking for forgiveness, asked what had happened. This girl's name was Victoria de Thierry, and she and Stein were engaged. She knew about his infidelity, but she had to come to terms with it and get engaged, because it was a deal between the families. But after seeing this scene, she finally realized that her pathetic husband Stein was just a hopeless scoundrel. And only thanks to the villain did she finally gather the courage to call off the wedding, and Victoria sincerely admired her confidence and steadfastness. The heroine, who had not expected such a turn of events at all, had no idea what Lady Victoria was talking about. For some reason, instead of a villain, everyone started calling her a heroine, as if the girl had the gift of foresight, and all the ladies admired how she poured a drink on him. Herencia was simply in shock. This was not what she wanted at all, but everyone present began to idolize her. The heroine decided that she needed to run away from here right now, declaring that she had urgent business, but Victoria asked permission to treat her to at least a cup of tea. One of the cafe employees apologized and turned to Lady Renzi, noticing the chair that had brown stains from spilled coffee on it. Herencia realized that now she would finally be able to take advantage of the chance and appear before the people as an angry lady. She asked how much the chair cost, but the employee suggested simply paying for cleaning instead of buying a new one. She laughed. Would they really continue to use this chair in the cafe? Because it would be very embarrassing to use it after this. Having thrown several gold coins into the hands of the cafe employee, the lady languidly turned away and was finally about to leave the establishment where she had caused a stir. She decided to be the arrogant Novelita, confident that money solves absolutely everything, while the employee looked at the pile of gold coins. Deciding that there had been too much fuss for the first day, the lady left the establishment and boarded an ornate carriage. When she came home, she wondered why no one understood what a true villain she was, because everyone present began to admire her. She wanted everything to turn out the other way around, and for people to hate and fear her, but despite what happened in the cafe, everything turned out completely differently. Having left the employee a lot of gold coins, everyone began to consider her generous and even planned to buy a new chair, and rumors began to spread that now they even wanted to renovate this cafe. There was nothing that could be fixed, and since nothing had worked out yesterday, the heroine decided that she would have to try harder today. This morning, early in the morning, Herencia ran into the kitchen and screamed loudly, asking why they brought her breakfast so late. She began to angrily pick on one of the maids who was ironing the clothes. I assure you that all the cuffs were creased and needed to be ironed more diligently. She also ran out into the garden and asked the gardener to come down immediately and see how terribly he had cut down the trees. Since it didn't work out for us to live with enemies outside, Herencia decided to start people in his palace and began to behave differently so that everyone would think that she had gone crazy. Previously, it had seemed unacceptable to her to interfere in the affairs of servants, but she could not do anything, and she did not want to be left without the enemies that she needed now. Agnes was waiting for Milady at the door and asked her where she had gone so early, since she had previously been lying in her bed until lunch. The lady said that she was checking how the servants were doing their work, and Agnes had never heard such words before. She wondered if the mistress had really gone to the servants right at dawn, and Milady was indignant that the servants were working carelessly and therefore received a well-deserved scolding. Agnes was a little worried by the girl's behavior, but she was her closest servant, so she was not at all afraid of her. The heroine had too much to do today, so she sat down at the table to write an important list while the maid stood nearby. Agnes was surprised. Now the lady was keeping track of merits and even making a list of things to do on her own, and this was completely strange. The Duke's family had 3 children. The eldest, Mr. Elbrez, was notorious for harassing the maids, and the second, Mr. Evan, beat his companions whenever he got angry. The young lady was the daughter of a ducal family and was considered a strict and strong-willed lady, but she always treated the servants with great respect. Agnes admired Milady. The young lady was truly worthy of success. And did she really decide to become the mistress of the Novelita family? The lady had just reached the right age, and the Duke was soon to name an heir, but the heroine did not even think about it. Agnes thought that this was exactly what my lady needed, but apparently she was wrong in her guesses, but she believed that the lady would become an excellent ruler. In the Empire, even a woman can inherit the throne if she has certain abilities, and Agnes was sure that Milady will definitely succeed. Right now, there were no contenders for the throne. The master was so worried, and the servants were worried, and she thought that the lady had made such a difficult decision. It was no coincidence that today she had walked around the estate before breakfast and had already planned out her entire day, which spoke of diligence and hard work. Agnes was sure that the gentleman would be delighted with this news, and wasn't it a delightful event? Because 30 years ago, women could hardly become heirs to the throne. But now, everything was different, and Agnes asked the lady not to hide her true intentions and to show everyone behind her pride her ambition and desires. Herencia looked in surprise at the maid, who was inexplicably happy about something and who had already seen in her dreams how her mistress became a ruler. But things didn't go according to her plan. She wanted to become a real villain, so she asked the maid to stop talking nonsense. She asked for breakfast to be brought, deciding to lie down a little longer. But now it was not so important that Agnes had misunderstood everything because the others were not yet in the know. However, soon her father called her and asked if the girl had really decided to become the head of the family, and she did not think at all that her father would find out about everything so quickly. The father admitted that he was very happy with this decision and suggested starting preparations for tomorrow, while the lady did not even understand what was being discussed. Herencia was sure that the brothers would take all the responsibility, and the father was happy that the girls suddenly became interested in the family's affairs. The brothers contacted him this morning and said that they were happy to cede the throne to their sister. The heroine had to smile back at her father, but in her soul she was angry and raging because things were going smoothly for them. The heir must enrich the family, but her goal is nothing other than to completely destroy it. Herencia tried to guess what would happen if she suddenly became the heir to a great family. People will probably whisper that she overestimated herself and made a huge mistake. Everyone will laugh behind her back because Novelita will go to hell. Although it is quite possible that if she becomes the heir, she will finally be able to destroy her family and change the future. Therefore, Herencia happily announced that she was ready to start lessons from tomorrow and fully supported her father's opinion, because as the heiress, she could create such a scandal that no one had even dreamed of. The next morning, the lady refused to take the carriage and decided to ride on horseback, while all the servants were perplexed. Agnes began to worry that something was wrong with the carriage, and if she didn't like the white one, they would be happy to provide a gold one. Everything was fine with the carriage. The heroine just wanted to get there on horseback, feeling the complete freedom of a new life. Everyone looked at her as a reckless, immature, spoiled child, and now was the perfect time to destroy her reputation. They say that riding a horse through the city is completely uncultured, but Agnes was most worried that it could be very dangerous. And if the servants looked like that, the nobles would definitely be shocked, so the lady suggested that the maid follow her in the carriage or stay here. She quickly jumped onto her horse, while Inez was puzzled as to why the lady had decided to behave this way. After all, riding a horse could be dangerous, and Agnes was restless as she watched the galloping horse. At the same time, 2 young men from the palace received a message that the heir of the Novelita family was soon to visit them. The noble gentleman in an exquisite black suit was surprised that there really was an official heir in this family. His assistant heard that lessons had recently begun to ensure that this man became a worthy heir to the family line. None of them could even guess who this man was, but he was supposed to visit them soon, and the young man could ask about everything personally. The heir of the family turned out to be a mystery to them, and the noble gentleman wondered who it could be. Noble gentlemen often strolled through the small streets of the town to check how security was maintained. Suddenly, a little girl came up to the young men and joyfully cried out that finally, for the first time in her life, she saw a real prince. A girl with admiring eyes named Sophia joyfully greeted His Highness, as was the custom among the local people. The prince carefully stroked the girl's head and asked if he was a real prince, then where was his princess wandering? Suddenly, the young man sensed danger and covered the young lady with his body. His assistant shouted loudly for everyone to disperse immediately. After all, a horse was galloping down the main street of the city, and on top of it was a stranger. The young man was outraged by such behavior because the child almost got hurt, and it was forbidden to ride horses in the streets. He was going to use magic, but he knew that if they found out about it, he could get into big trouble, and he only had time to see it when the horse briskly jumped right over his head. The heroes met each other's eyes, and the indignant prince wondered what kind of impudent person dared to ride a horse among the local residents. Mother Sophia ran to the girl, worried that her child might be hurt, and the assistant tried to find out if everyone was safe. Fortunately, everything was fine, and the prince managed to cover the young lady with his body, and everything was fine with the baby. She didn't even have time to get scared, and saw almost nothing, being under the protection of the noble young man. This was unacceptable on the city streets because people could get hurt, and the prince was interested in whether the little girl was hurt or if she was in pain. He stood up abruptly, considering the impudent man to be absolutely insane, and shouted that an unforeseen tragedy could have happened because of his horse. And only now did he realize that the person riding the horse was not a young man at all, but a young girl. He was very surprised to see a beautiful lady standing in front of him, who admitted in a sweet voice that it had happened completely by accident. Seeing that the lady was riding well, she also turned to the girl and asked if she was okay and if she was scared. The little girl saw a real princess in front of her and declared that the lady had descended from the soft clouds. Imagine her in front of her in a soft pink robe. Herencia stroked the baby's head and admitted that she saw the most beautiful girl in the world in front of her. But now, something else was important. Not all wounds can be seen from the outside, and now the girl did not feel any pain, but she was very afraid that later she might feel ill. Sophia's mother looked at what had happened with frightened eyes and was very afraid that her child could really be harmed. Herencia promised to compensate everything and send a check to Novelita's family, promising that if anything happened to the child, it would be her responsibility. The heroine was so worried that she even forgot to introduce herself to the noble prince, whom she was seeing for the first time. Extending her hand to him, the lady told him her name, and finally the young man learned who Herencia Novelita was. His cold-blooded gaze enveloped the girl, and she could not understand why this young man frowned so much, because nothing terrible had happened, and could it be that he simply did not like her? The first lesson of the training took place, where the teacher talked about the tripartite agreements that oblige the empire to protect vulnerable countries that signed the treaty. The lady found the talk about vulnerable countries incredibly boring, but she tried not to show that she was not at all interested. The prince was also present at the training, as he needed to supervise the process. Instead of listening to the teacher, Lady Herencia looked at the dark-haired prince and thought how handsome he was. His dark hair seemed to absorb the light, and his eyes, the color of the night sky, attracted attention with something elusive that made her heart beat faster. This young man was much more handsome than her ex-husband, whom she fell in love with at first sight in her past life, and if she had met him earlier, she would have given him her heart. Of course, even then she would never have met him, the undisputed dark heir of the Gretelos family, named Euclid Gretelos. He was an imperial inspector, but the infamous Novelita family was a hotbed of corruption, and the two families were completely different. If the heroine had known that he was so handsome, maybe she would not have avoided places where they could meet. Herencia understood that this was not her goal at all, but despite all the arguments of reason, Herencia could not look away. Recently, when she was on horseback and almost caused trouble, the lady extended her hand to him and told him her name, but in response the young man only looked at her gloomily. He didn't even say hello and said in a menacing voice that it was time for him to go, thus giving his name. At that moment, Herencia thought that Euclid was a real rude guy because it was really so difficult for him to just say hello to a stranger. It turns out that the first impression of her was not the most pleasant, and now somehow it was necessary to correct the situation, although perhaps it was even good, and in any case, one should not forget why she sits in these boring lessons. The teacher said that His Majesty the Emperor organized a company for vulnerable states, and made this the name of justice and a peaceful sky. There was a slap on the table in the office, and it was Herencia asking the teacher to wait a little. She wondered if this meant that the Empire was pursuing the right path, and if the teacher wasn't embarrassed that she had destroyed the country under the guise of an agreement. The teacher interrupted the lesson and explained that the Empire is obliged to protect countries that swear allegiance, but the heroine was indignant because the Empire only protects those states that pay tribute. She doubted that such an empire could be called righteous and asked the teacher himself for his opinion. There is a saying, don't even think about stepping on your teacher's shadow, and arguing in class is simply impolite. She confidently expressed her dissatisfaction, and the young man sitting next to her said that analyzing history from an objective perspective is very useful. The teacher did not expect at all that someone would dare to say something like that, and even more so, that it would be some girl. He angrily declared that the lesson was over and walked out of the room at the speed of light, and Renshi did not understand why he gave in so easily in a verbal altercation. The heroine deliberately chose words that would upset the teacher, because it was not for nothing that she prepared for this lesson. When the teacher left the office, the boys greeted Mrs. Herencia and admitted that they fully agreed with her opinion. Today's teacher was just awful, and he ran away because his opinion was simply not agreed with, without any arguments being given. Euclid remained silent all this time and carefully observed the lady's behavior, trying to understand what she had decided to do. One of the young men asked if this was the girl's first lesson, and if she was feeling unwell, he offered to walk her home. But Euclid interrupted him, insisting that he was the one who would escort the lady, and the young man did not even have any point in arguing with the high-ranking gentleman. He grinned sarcastically and declared that the lady had definitely not gotten here by carriage, and holding out his hand in a black glove, he offered to follow him. He even admitted that it was better this way than going alone, and he rather expected the girl to give her consent. Something like surprise flashed in his eyes, and then a weak, barely noticeable smile, and the lady was surprised that such a handsome young man was choosing stupid words. At their first meeting, he rudely ignored her, but now the lady wanted to change the rules and agreed to go with Euclid. She felt that the game had definitely begun, because right now she did not meet the gaze of the noble young man, who also looked with interest at the lady's sweet face, but it was completely unclear what he wanted. In front of everyone present, the lady took Euclid by the arm, as if they had known each other for a long time, and walked out of the office with him. Behind their backs, people started whispering whether they really knew each other, but it was simply impossible. The young man who had invited the girl to go with him felt a terrible defeat, and a menacing grimace appeared on his face. A black carriage with black, noble horses was waiting for the prince near the training building. Sitting inside, the heroine realized that traveling on a horse was much more comfortable than being in a stuffy carriage, and on a horse she felt fast and free. Today was the first lesson, during which the lady also caused a stir, after which the teacher left the room without saying a word. Time flew by incredibly quickly, the heroine thought, and probably this stupid and useless life will fly by just as unnoticed. Lady Herencia and Euclid were sitting in the same carriage, and the lady, against her will, could not take her eyes off his dark charm. Suddenly breaking the silence, the young man asked if the lady really didn't want to tell him anything. Herencia knew that Euclid was a controversial figure, surrounded by rumors and secrets, and in response she only quietly asked what he was likely to say. The young man admitted that he had clearly noticed how the girl had been glaring at him throughout the entire lecture, carefully studying every detail of his face. The heroine did not expect such a frank question and asked in surprise if she had really been looking at him. But she knew perfectly well that she had been staring at him for the entire lecture, without looking away for a second. Sighing, Herencia apologized, but then realized that the villainess never apologized for any of her actions. So she made a rude face and said that Euclid should forget about it and never mention it again. But the young man was sure that she was now openly lying, because he felt her persistent gaze behind his back. The lady admitted that she had only looked a little, but she knew that she couldn't let anyone know that she liked this man. Herencia admitted that the young man was simply too handsome, and his face changed from such a revelation. Herencia asked if it was really bad to look at a beautiful person, since it wouldn't harm him in any way, and she couldn't turn back time so he wouldn't notice. Looking him straight in the eye, she brazenly declared that she would be more careful next time because the young man was so embarrassed that even she felt ashamed. Euclid, after the lady's impudent words, opened his eyes in surprise. He looked at the lady, trying to figure out what was behind this unexpected boldness. The young man leaned back in the carriage, continuing to study her intently. There was no longer any coldness in his eyes because his cheeks had become bright red like cherries. Herencia returned to her palace, and Agnes immediately came to her, declaring that the lady should not run away like that under any circumstances, and she was very worried. The maid emotionally recounted how she heard that Milady had arrived in a carriage with Mr. Euclid. Worried that the other young ladies would start bullying her, Herencia tried to ignore the information. Agnes screamed, "Sir, and Euclid is incredibly popular. Everyone in the capital knows him, and even every noble lady in the empire." She called it downright municipal property, and at that moment the heroine was struck by a thought, like a lightning strike. She rushed to the maid and asked her to tell her even more information about Mr. Euclid. After all, the girl was sure that after meeting a famous young man, they would start to hate her, and especially if she was in the same carriage with him, they could hound her. Agnes did not mean this at all, and she wanted to convey a completely different idea to the lady. It's just that this young man is so popular, and she was afraid that rumors would spread and the situation would get out of control. But Herencia was happy, because that was all she needed, and she even thanked Agnes for the information he provided. A popular man, worthy of the title of municipal property, and in her capable hands he could become a powerful weapon. This means that the young man is sacred territory that cannot be entered, so as not to get into trouble. And if Herencia declares her sympathy for such a man, of course, all the people of the empire will hate her, and Agnes is worried simply because they were in the same carriage. If the heroine agreed to marry him, everyone would just go crazy, and that was exactly what she needed. Herencia decided to pursue him desperately, and if she got enough of him, perhaps his entire family would hate her too. Having come up with a grand plan, the lady waved her hands, and this idea turned out to be simply perfect for her. But Agnes, seeing the strange state of her mistress, began to worry that Milady was going to go down a completely wrong path. The next morning, at a family dinner, the girl confessed to her parents that there was a man she would like to marry. The relatives choked on their food in surprise because no one could even imagine that their sister would do such a thing. Mother slowly turned her head in her direction and asked in a quiet voice if her daughter was really going to get married. And the father opened his mouth completely and could not find a single suitable word to express his raging emotions. All that was left was to tell her relatives about her grandiose plan, which she came up with literally yesterday. Having informed her family that she was going to accept his proposal, the lady tried to feel confident. For the relatives, this was simply unexpected, and it turns out that the girl was dating someone, and they didn't even have a clue about it. But Herencia laughed and confessed, telling about love at first sight, so she must definitely get married. Now it remains to tell the most unexpected thing, because Mother wanted to know who this noble gentleman was. The lady gave the name of Euclid Gratellos, the current Duke and future Grand Duke of the entire empire. Just hearing this name, the father became furious, shouting that there was no talk of this man, and the wedding would only take place over his dead body. Herencia knew perfectly well that her father would react this way, but she said that it was too late. After all, she had already sent him a letter proposing to enter into an official marriage, and to do it as soon as possible. The letter should have been at the Duke's estate by now, and the distraught father could not believe his daughter's words. As the heroine had said, the Duke's assistant was already holding a letter with a small red heart in his hands, saying that it came from Lady Herencia. Euclid asked again who the message was from, and his assistant reread that the letter came from Herencia Novelita. The young man did not understand why the girl would send the message, but the assistant also did not really understand why the gentleman was asking this question to him. This was the most unexpected news of the evening, and Euclid only sighed heavily after hearing it. He asked his assistant to open the letter and read the contents, slowly buttoning his maroon shirt. The assistant was surprised that such an honor was prepared for him, and the young man did not understand what his surprise was, because he always read all the incoming messages anyway. Looking at the small red heart on the envelope, the assistant realized that this was undoubtedly a love letter. He eagerly opened the envelope and began to read the first lines, which were addressed to the esteemed Mr. Euclid. The letter contained only a couple of lines, and the young man read the most unexpected words, where the lady proposed to marry her. After asking for forgiveness, Euclid looked back at his assistant, thinking that he was trying to make fun of him. Euclid told Frederick that this could be his last joke before he was fired, and he should stop doing it immediately. But he reread the letter again, where the lady asked the respected Mr. Euclid to marry her. Not believing the assistant, the young man grabbed the letter in his own hands to make sure that what was written was true. The young man stood in bewilderment, reading a couple of lines, and could not believe that the letter really contained a proposal of marriage. He looked into the envelope to make sure that the letter was really there and was really addressed to him from the lady. Euclid reread these lines many times to understand that this was really happening. Standing in bewilderment and shock, Euclid could not even imagine what was wrong with this girl and why she decided to propose at all. The next morning after the strange letter, Euclid shouted loudly throughout the palace, "Was Lady Herencia already here?" He was sure the letter was indeed a declaration of war, but the assistant laughed that the gentleman had accepted her offer and still calls it that. The young man was confused. Did Frederick really think that this was a real proposal? And no matter with what intonation you read her letter, it still seemed to the young man that she was getting ready to fight. The lady did indeed arrive early in the morning, and Euclid asked his assistant to tell her to wait in the drawing room. And now it didn't matter to him at all in what form he would appear before her. The main thing was to find out what this girl had planned. She didn't even warn him of her arrival, and Euclid wasn't going to dress up for her. Frederick noticed that the gentleman was incredibly nervous, and for the first time he had seen such raging emotions in him. And he didn't even think that Mr. Euclid would be so excited, because before this man treated everything cold-bloodedly and calculatingly. Having met Herencia, Frederick realized that this girl really did not look like an ordinary princess. Her gaze was admirable, full of mystery and enigma, as well as some incredible magic of attraction. Euclid came out into the drawing room to see Milady and declared that it was rather rude to break into his palace without warning. He ordered his assistants to leave the living room immediately, realizing that everyone present might feel awkward right now. Euclid was incredibly nervous, and it was even difficult for him to concentrate and understand what to do next after seeing this impudent girl. When Herencia sent the letter, she was sure that the young man would refuse the offer because his whole appearance screamed that he was not happy to see her. But even in such a situation, he still cared about her dignity, which spoke of his considerate attitude. Herencia did not waste time chatting and asked if the gentleman had received her love letter. She immediately asked what the gentleman's answer would be, but he responded to her question with the same question about what she herself thought about this matter. The lady happily declared that his answer was clearly obvious and that the young man would in no case agree to marry and would refuse right then and there. She was already expecting to hear his angry speech, but the young man only quietly asked if she really thought so. He walked up and leaned right in front of her face, asking if she was sure he was going to reject her. At that moment, the lady felt like a little bunny at whom a formidable wolf was looking with gray eyes. After all, for some reason the game was now going completely against her rules, which she was absolutely sure of. Frederick looked at the master and lady with bated breath and did not even try to understand what was happening here now. The butler also did not say a word, standing in complete bewilderment from the unexpected situation. Herencia herself was shocked, asking what the gentleman meant, since they were seeing each other for the second time in their lives. She had not even been presented to the court yet, but Euclid declared that the girl had been the first to propose marriage to a stranger, and he was sure that everything would happen soon. He smiled and admitted that the wedding was very opportune because the banquet in honor of his birthday was in just 2 months, and there they would be able to announce their engagement. Herencia certainly didn't expect this turn of events, but now she had no other choice and asked if he really decided to accept her offer. Euclid admitted that he needed to think about it for a while, but he was quite open to the possibility. Returning home, the heroine was upset, telling the maid that Euclid was going to think about an engagement. Agnes was sure that his words sounded promising. He was irresistible, that could not be taken away from him, but under no circumstances could she ignore my lady. With her face buried in her pillow, the heroine couldn't understand when everything went wrong, because he should have refused. The girl who dared to desire Mr. Euclid, a public treasure, was finally rejected. Now she is simply obsessed with him, impudent and rebellious. She didn't want to be talked about like that and didn't think that the gentleman would actually accept her marriage proposal. But now he said with complete confidence that he was going to think about it seriously, and the girl's head was simply spinning this evening. Her thoughts were torn apart, and suddenly the butler announced that a letter had arrived for my lady. Suspecting who had sent the message, the lady turned to the butler with bated breath. It seemed that it was a personal invitation especially for her, and the butler thought that it would be better for the lady to open it herself. She was surprised and did not understand who could send her a personal invitation, because not a single letter had arrived to this palace for too long. Soon, she went to the meeting, where the noble ladies were incredibly happy to see Lady Herencia. She even deliberately showed up very late and dressed too smartly for the tea ceremony so that the girls would speak as badly of her as possible. But for some reason, the meeting was filled with an incredibly kind atmosphere, and the ladies looked at the long-awaited guest with admiration. One of the girls admitted that there were a lot of rumors about the lady, but for some reason these rumors only made people happy. Herencia did not understand where she had miscalculated, because she had deliberately behaved incorrectly, was rude and impudent, and rumors should have entrusted her honor. But people said that she did only good and brave deeds, and this was completely different from what the lady expected. It was said that Lady Herencia tried to break the ingrained traditions of the empire, where the culture had become too harsh, and even one lady admitted that she also loved to ride horses, but was afraid to do it openly without being judged. But on the day when the girl appeared in the center of town on horseback, she broke this unspoken rule. The noble women were under pressure from all sides, and in such a world it was not so easy to take matters into one's own hands and be an example for others. The lady suggested having a snack first, then going horseback riding, and then visiting a cafe where they say the interior has been completely remodeled. The cafe was called the Midday Sun, and it was there that Lady Victoria refused her impudent husband Stein's upcoming wedding. She took revenge on him well, and the ladies heard that the girl even hit him right in the face. She finally found the courage. In truth, Victoria's life changed dramatically that day, because if she had married Stein, a sad fate would have awaited her. She confessed that it was all thanks to Lady Herencia, who exposed the liar and impudent man. Lady Herencia was now the first star among the noble ladies. She could not believe that everything turned out so wonderfully only thanks to her. The ladies found her delightful and incredibly charismatic, and admired her confidence, sincerely wanting to follow her example. Herencia had not expected such glory at all, because now all the noble ladies idolized her and considered her the most confident lady of the empire. She wanted to justify that she was completely indifferent here. She turned to the girl with admiration and asked if she could teach them how to defend their opinions and behave in society. This is something the heroine never expected, that she would become a real star, who would be asked to teach them how to do the same as she can. The girls were waiting for her answers. Each of them really dreamed of being like her, to have the same self-confidence. Victoria continued to hold her hand, hoping that people would agree and show them what it meant to be a real lady. Euclid, whose name was synonymous with success and composure, was in turmoil. He was used to controlling every aspect of his life. But now, in his carefully constructed world, there was a note, the false and persistent Lady Herencia. He couldn't understand why she occupied all his thoughts. Her smile, light and mysterious, seemed to hint at secrets that he desperately wanted to unravel. Before this, the young man had always relied on reason. Everything was perfect, but next to this girl he lost his composure, and for the first time he experienced something like this. Frederick clearly called this feeling first love, and the gentleman menacingly declared whether he really wanted to be fired. He now immediately set to work, declaring that he was extremely busy as he had accumulated an incredible amount of paperwork. For the first time in his life, Euclid realized that he was losing control, and the reason for this was Lady Herencia, a mysterious stranger who had entered his thoughts without invitation. It all happened too impulsively, and he wanted to give up on the marriage, but at that moment he simply couldn't stand it and said completely different words. And as soon as she was next to him, he himself did not understand why he said that he was not going to reject her at all. He tried to brush off this obsession, explaining it all away as being busy and stressed, but the truth was much more prosaic and frightening. The gentleman was even now sure that in any case it was a mistake, and had he always been so unrestrained? Her gaze, piercing and appraising, seemed to see right through him, revealing his weaknesses and hidden desires. But after he declared his readiness to accept the proposal, the girl had such a strange expression on her face, as if she expected something completely different. Her reaction seemed too cute to him. The young man could not even imagine what this strange girl was thinking about. After thinking for a bit, the heroine realized that the noble lady's offer was just right for her, and this time everything would work out for real. At first she was confused when the young ladies asked to teach them, but if she thought about it, she had no reason to refuse. In fact, it will even be better there. Thanks to them, a wonderful, brilliant thought came to her. She decided to call this project How to Become a Villain, and step 1, she will teach girls bad behavior and turn them into perfect villains. Step 2, Herencia decided to destroy the noble reputation of the young ladies, after which the entire secular society would begin to hate them. When everyone found out that it was her doing, and that she was the one who taught the lady to behave inappropriately in prison, Herencia would be criticized for corrupting innocent noble women, and it was a perfect vicious circle of evil. She turned to Agnes with a request to immediately begin to carry out her grand plan. The heroine asked to write invitations, and also to bring her paper and a pen. This is where her villainous training will begin. The ladies happily sat around the head of the table and waited for the lady to begin telling the most important secrets of success. The girls listened attentively to the lady, and Herencia asked if they were all ready to become like her. The ladies with admiring eyes were delighted that the training would begin right now, and each of them dreamed of becoming like Herencia. Since everything had been decided, the lady was ready to begin in a minute, and the girls listened to her attentively. Holding notebooks in their hands, they were not prepared to write down every word she said, so as not to miss even the slightest detail. The ladies were full of enthusiasm, and the heroine was sure they would make wonderful villains. When the training began, the noble ladies were a little confused after the first few minutes, because they had never behaved like that before. They did not understand whether they really had to behave exactly as Lady Herencia said. The lady claimed that the later the girl arrived, the more attention she attracted, and they had to be late for her classes, and this was not discussed. They arrived late anyway, but the lady arrived even later, and insisted that even if the lady promised to arrive on time, she would still be late. The ladies agreed that they would be half an hour late before the start of the class. It wasn't a matter of time, but of the fact that they arrived late, and if the heroine's reputation suffered because of being late, the girls would stop respecting her. Soon, their lesson was about to come to an end, and the lady smiled and suggested reminding them that today was the most important information, and they must remember it and repeat it every day, early in the morning, standing in front of the mirror. The first rule of a noble lady was to always take all her gifts back. The lady said that the girls would have to return everything they were given, even if they liked these gifts incredibly. If they forget all the other rules, these 2 basic rules will definitely change their lives. Herencia called the young master for help so that they could act out a scene and practice today. She said that if her servant invited girls to dance, they should behave strictly as follows. Even if an incredibly handsome man approaches them, the ladies should indifferently refuse. Seeing the incredibly cute, handsome man, the first thing the ladies wanted to do was, of course, agree. But they promised the lady to try their best, no matter what, to become like her. The lady was desperate to become the biggest villain in the empire, and today she decided to deal with her servants. Having gathered all the maids and servants, she decided to check everyone who was performing their duties. In recent days, the heroine had no time to find fault with the servants and deal with the affairs of the palace. She had to do this to become a real villain, because she felt that she had become too relaxed. But since she hadn't checked them for a long time, now she could definitely find fault with the little things, planning to scold the servants all day. Putting on white gloves, Horencia went to check how dirty the palace was, but when she ran her hand along the windowsill, she couldn't believe how clean it was. Rushing in different directions, she tried to find somewhere a pile of dust for which she could scold the maids. Even when she came to the kitchen, she saw a magnificently set table where perfect cleanliness was also maintained. All the dresses in the wardrobe were perfectly ironed and washed, and the lady could not believe that the servants in the palace really did their job well. The last hope was the gardener, but when she went out into the garden, she saw a beautifully trimmed figure from the bushes, and she did not understand whether everyone here really worked. She had nothing to complain about at all, and the lady declared that since when had servants been doing their job so well? The servants admitted that their work brought them great pleasure, and their self-esteem rose even more, because the mistress did not find a single flaw. Now the heroine did not understand how to become a villain and why to scold the servants, because everything in the palace was simply perfect. Not understanding what there was to find fault with, the heroine looked around every corner of the palace but found nothing. Sebastian approached her and informed her that a distinguished guest had arrived at the palace and that the lady should probably go out to see him. She opened the door and heard a faint creaking sound, angrily declaring that the door was constantly squeaking and should have been fixed earlier. Sebastian promised to fix it as soon as the guests left, and bowing his head, asked Milady for forgiveness. He said that he would do everything himself and did not even intend to ask the servants for help, but the lady was sure that such work required a knowledgeable person, since Dr. Repair was the work of another craftsman. She asked to invite carpenters and blacksmiths here, but Sebastian assured her that they needed to be called in advance. Finally, the lady found something to complain about, and it didn't matter whether it was an aristocrat or a commoner or even a lowborn. She ordered that someone be found who could handle this task. The carpenters of the Greytree Guild were renowned for being the finest craftsmen who carried out work exclusively for noble families. Previously, this guild consisted only of experienced craftsmen, but due to the monopolization, Greytree turned into a gathering of inept craftsmen. The aristocrats knew this very well, but still continued to turn to them out of pride. This had nothing to do with the heroine, because now she absolutely didn't care about her reputation, and she wanted Sebastian to be accused of behavior unbecoming of an aristocrat. Surely she constantly hurt his pride, because he himself was looking for work on par with ordinary people, but the young man just knew a good master. After his words, Sebastian even smiled, and Horencia was disgraced even here. Sebastian is nicknamed the Wooden Doll because he rarely smiles or gets angry, but today he actually smiled. And he smiled at the lady, thanking the young lady, and she did not understand what she had done again. The butler's great-grandson was an excellent craftsman, and Agnes had heard that he was very experienced, and if he did the job well, he would be known as a good craftsman. And just now, Horencia gave a commoner a great opportunity to show himself and reveal the talent that the Novelita family recognized. It turns out that being a villain is incredibly difficult when everything in the palace is good and perfect. The girl had not felt so calm for a long time, and she realized that it was time to take care of important matters. Agnes said that it was necessary to select a dress, jewelry, and accessories for her presentation at court. And most importantly, it was necessary to find a noble partner as soon as possible who would represent herself with her. I thought earlier that only one person would be suitable for this role, and my first thought was about Mr. Euclid. On the birthday of Prince Barlos, the Emperor's heir, in her life, in this very hall, she met her husband. In her past life, she thought it was a lifelong love, enchanted by a sweet, noble gentleman. She believed that she would finally be happy when they got married, but it was all just a terrible illusion. So this time she was going to find the perfect partner, someone so dazzling that she wouldn't even want to look at her ex-husband. Someone who truly shines, a gentleman who attracts the attention of others with his manners and nobility. Having compared all the facts, the heroine realized that only one person was perfect for this role. The next day, Euclid was going to a banquet in honor of Barlos's birthday and asked Frederick to prepare everything thoroughly. The young man even laughed. Was the gentleman really going there for the lady? And his jokes got him pretty pissed. The imperial family is now in the midst of a bitter war for succession to the throne. Prince Barlos relied on the support of the Empress from the old nobility, and Prince Grasus was quickly gaining power with the support of the rising factions. In this chaos, Prince Gretelos had maintained a neutral position, and if Lord Euclid came to Barlos's banquet, people might think that he was now on the Empress's side. The imperial family must be putting pressure on him, and it was no wonder that the young man was in such a terrible mood before the banquet. Frederick warned that it was necessary to prepare well and find a partner whom he would accompany. At this moment, the gentleman's assistant approached Euclid and informed him that another urgent letter had arrived for him. The letter again looked like a love letter and was probably from Lady Novelita. Looking at the cute heart on the envelope, the young man felt that he was even afraid to open it. He asked his assistant to open the letter, but Frederick no longer agreed, since another assistant had brought it. The gentleman asked him to stop whining, and as soon as Frederick read the first lines, he said that the gentleman had great news and he had a partner. A whole week had passed since receiving the letter, and Herencia was worried because Euclid still hadn't responded, and she even wondered if she would really have to break into his house again to get what she wanted. These thoughts did not give the girl any peace, and on the one hand they even scared her, because she did not want to do this at all. Today she was heading to the studio where the ladies had already informed her that her exquisite dresses were ready. Designer Andre, the owner of the studio, met the lady and was very pleased to see such a distinguished guest. Entire studios were specially closed for the lady so that she could calmly try on a suitable outfit, and Agnes has already rushed to help to choose the most luxurious garment. The lady was attracted by one dress and immediately declared that she definitely liked this style. But Andre declared that he had no intention of selling the dress, and Agnes could not believe that the lady had chosen it. They asked to take a closer look at other outfits that were now very popular in the Empire, and many times nicer. Agnes wanted to appear like a real villain and said that she simply had to take the dress that she liked. While the ladies were in the studio, a stranger suddenly entered who recognized Lady Herencia's carriage. The young man introduced himself as Frederick, assistant to Mr. Euclid, who was probably looking for the lady. Looking at the young man, the lady realized that she remembered him exactly, because it was he who was in the same office with them at that time. But if Euclid's assistant was here, it is quite possible that the gentleman himself was nearby. Naturally, the next second, the venerable Euclid entered the studio and asked Frederick how he had come up with the idea of leaving his master. To his great surprise, he saw Lady Herencia nearby, although they had not even agreed, but happened to be in the studio at the same time. Herencia was also stunned by the appearance of this man, from whom it was absolutely impossible to take your eyes off. The assistants and the owner of the studio stood silently, while the heroes looked intently into each other's eyes. Frederick approached the soft pink dress and asked if the lady was really going to the banquet in it, since Euclid needed to pick out something appropriate. The lady asked if the young man had accepted her proposal, since he had not responded in all these days. The young man suddenly categorically answered no, and the heroine wondered if he was rejecting her. But he meant something completely different, and stated that he should be the one asking this question. Gently taking the girl by the hand, he was going to find out her opinion, whether she was ready to go with him to the banquet. Getting down on one knee and kissing her hand, the young man made an official statement and asked if she would agree to him accompanying her to the event. His question, spoken with quiet confidence, made her feel a slight tremor. She saw in his eyes not just politeness and respect, but something much more. In this small studio, among the sketches and fabrics, he revealed to her a new side of their relationship, a side that was both frightening and delightful. The maid and Frederick, as well as the owner of the studio, looked at what was happening, fascinated because it was incredibly cute. It was as if a union of two people appeared before them, where she was his lady and he became her master. It may have been just a game between them, but who knew what the future held for the two heroes? The banquet was just a pretext, but the true meaning lay in the depths of his gaze. Prince Barlos's birthday had arrived, and all the most respected gentlemen of the Empire were heading there. Mr. Euclid arrived at the ladies' palace in a black suit, the classic cut which sat perfectly on his stately figure, emphasizing aristocratic restraint. The girl's father, upon meeting him, asked if he would really be accompanying his daughter today. He asked what his father was so busy with and hiding in his palace, and the young man grinned and replied that he had no idea that the busy duke was interested in their family. Deep down, he waited, and then, as if answering his secret wish, Lady Herencia came down the steps. The father and Euclid, seeing the girl, opened their eyes in surprise because it was the first time they saw her in such an outfit. The red dress, which hugged her chiseled figure, seemed to glow in the evening light, and the deep cutout at the back, revealing her perfect shoulder line, added a daring elegance to the look. The father was outraged. The lady's back was completely exposed, and the impudent lady, showing off in front of him, asked if something was really wrong. She looked especially dazzling in red and was set to be the star of today's event. The father asked his daughter to go and change her clothes because he knew very well what other people would say when they saw her image. She seemed to have stepped out of the pages of a novel, the embodiment of passion and mystery, and declared that this dress was unusual but incredibly luxurious and just right for the event. Euclid couldn't help but admire her. Every step she took was full of grace and confidence, as if she were dancing rather than walking. To see her daughter off, the mother came out to them and admitted that she was simply charming. She was incredibly proud of Herencia, and as expected of her daughter, she would be at her most luxurious for this event. Mother was just worried that the girl might freeze because it was still frosty on spring evenings. She didn't say a word about her bare shoulders and naked back, because she knew perfectly well that Herencia herself had made the choice to look that way. Suddenly, she noticed tension between her parents, who for some reason were not talking to each other at all. The lady even suggested that perhaps they had quarreled, but she had absolutely no time for that now. Euclid separated from his father and walked towards Lady Herencia. She was even more beautiful up close. The light scent of her perfume, subtle and intoxicating, filled his lungs. The mother wished her daughter to be careful and have a great time on her birthday. Inside the palace, there was already music, a muffled hubbub of voices and the light clinking of glasses. The ladies sparkled in luxurious dresses woven from silk. Long trains flowed along the parquet floor, and precious stones shimmered in the spotlight. An empress named Lily appeared before the guests and was surprised that one famous person would really come to the banquet. Barlos, the first prince of the empire, the son of the empress, confessed to his mother that this man had indeed promised to appear. Gretelos could not hide forever, and the empress turned to the princess of the empire, her daughter Selvarena, that this was an important day for her. She asked the first prince to introduce her to Mr. Euclid today because he knew very well how much his little sister had been looking forward to this day. Finally, the main characters appeared in the hall, and the princess, looking at Herencia, was indignant at the dress she was wearing. No one had seen this girl in the empire before, and everyone began to whisper as soon as the young couple entered the hall. But one thing became clear to everyone: Mr. Euclid came to the event with a companion, and they look incredibly good together. For a moment, even the loudest voices fell silent, giving way to astonished whispers and undisguised curiosity. Their appearance had the effect of a bomb exploding. Interested glances followed them as they slowly and with dignity headed deeper into the hall. People immediately realized that they would be attracting too much attention to themselves that evening, but that was exactly what she wanted. The banquet promised to be full of surprises, and their appearance was undoubtedly the most striking of them. But despite this, not a single person approached the Herencia. It was as if everyone deliberately turned their eyes away from her and did not even greet the young lady. And were all the ladies simply jealous of her because of Mr. Euclid, since she became the first lady to appear with him at the event? The intrigue grew with every minute, and everyone was interested in what connected these two and what plans they were hatching. The lady decided to walk around the entire room so that they could be properly examined, while Euclid felt like a little puppy on his first walk in his life. They approached the butler, and the young man greeted Mr. Gretelos and Lady Novelita. He said that His Majesty was asking for a meeting with the honorable gentleman in order to finally communicate with him personally. Out of the corner of her eye, the heroine noticed that the entire imperial family was looking only in their direction, and it even seemed to her that the empress and her daughter had their eyes on Mr. Euclid. She noticed the girl standing in the imperial family, who seemed to be burning her with her eyes. It was the empress's daughter, who was looking intently at the lady in the red dress, as if condemning and despising her. Prince Barlos raised his glass of red wine and greeted the guests who had come to his celebration. They sat down at the table with Euclid and his companion, and the lady thanked him for the warm welcome. It seems that Prince Barlos even liked her a little, but the princess didn't want to take her eyes off her. But the Empress, looking angrily in her direction, was clearly her enemy, and immediately asked if the Duchess herself had chosen this dress. To think that she decided to speak about it directly was exactly what the heroine needed to finally become a real villain. The Empress knew that the girl went out into society from time to time, but it seemed that she had no idea what rules this world lived by. Without hiding her feigned anger, the heroine decided to show her sincere anger and said that she had chosen the dress herself, especially for this banquet. Taking up the cutlery, the lady admitted that in fact she had not eaten anything since yesterday. Apparently, all the girls were starving themselves to fit into the dress, and Herencia, holding a fork in her hand, asked when they could start eating. She was going to greedily devour every bite, enjoying the food right in front of the Empress because the food at these banquets was simply incomparable, but no one touched it. Eating at a banquet was considered bad manners, and besides, the ladies, squeezed into their corsets, were hardly able to eat even a bite. They were all so hungry, but how would they feel watching someone else also eating delicious food right in front of them? So Renee's immediately started on the meat and was about to put the largest piece into her mouth. Chewing deliciously on the aromatic piece of meat, the lady understood how much this must be infuriating the Empress and everyone around her. At this point, Euclid suddenly asked if he could join her meal. They were the first people to start eating, while Herencia praised the talented cook because the meat turned out to be incredibly tender. Seeing this, the prince ordered that a plate be brought to him as quickly as possible because he also wanted to enjoy delicious dishes. If the prince also started eating, the others would not be able to openly condemn her antics, and the lady understood that this option could turn out to be a failure. But still, she continued to enjoy the delicious food, while Mr. Euclid stared at the princess. She sat and ate absolutely nothing, only carefully examining the interesting guests. There was tension between the heroes, and the most angry of them was the Empress. Looking at Herencia, the ladies only said with disappointment that if only they could wear such a dress, they would gladly try all the dishes at the banquet. But the girls were absolutely all in tight, cramped corsets, and only now did they realize that they could have worn completely different clothing. Victoria was present at the banquet with her friends, and the girls noticed that Herencia, as always, was the center of attention. Today, the ladies felt more confident than usual because they had already had several lessons from a real villain. Beautiful music began to play, and the ladies worshipped their mentor, who looked simply stunning today. The ladies understood that everyone would start dancing now, but at the first lesson, the lady said that the young men should definitely be refused. But that evening, the girls decided to have some fun, and taking strangers and young men by the arms, they gathered to dance beautiful dances with them. Mary was left alone and wished her friends a pleasant evening and to have fun from the heart. The couples whirled in a melodic waltz, with handsome gentlemen holding their luxurious ladies by the waist. A young man, charming and handsome, approached her and asked if the lady would do him the honor of dancing with him. Looking at the handsome man, the girl understood that it was not the time to stand there like a statue, and that she simply needed to do as Lady Herencia had taught her. According to etiquette, they had to introduce themselves first, but the young man suggested that they get to know each other better a little later. Being sure that the lady was obliged to agree, he, not hearing an answer from her, brazenly took her hand and declared that now they would go dancing. The lady screamed loudly and hit the young man with her hand, indignant at what he was doing. While all the couples were dancing, she stood with this young man who brazenly offered her his dance. The young man began to be rude, saying that the girl was simply playing hard to get, since she was standing in the corner all alone, having not found a partner for the dance. And the lady understood that she should not tolerate these insults, but she was not very confident in herself. At that moment, she remembered the words of Herencia, when the lady said that the girl gives what she receives and it does not matter. The main thing is to be shameless. Mary really never was rude to people left and right, and only tolerated insults and insults. And right in front of her appeared a real villain who wanted to take advantage of her shyness. Mary said that in any case she refused to dance and asked them to stop clinging to women because it looked very pathetic. Anger slowly rolled over the villain, and he declared that the lady was throwing herself at all men, and now she thought that playing at being brave and confident would change anything. Admitting that he had spoken to her out of pity, he asked her to consider it a gesture of charity. It seemed that some kind of skirmish was brewing. The young lady had refused her partner, and everyone had turned their attention to Lady Gertrude, who was constantly alone. People whispered that this girl was not in a position to choose partners, and Mary was downright sad, realizing that she would never become like Lady Orencia. At the right moment, the lady came up and asked why Mary was standing there in the corner, looking very sad. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes, and she was very happy when she saw Lady Orencia. She asked who wanted to be her partner, and asked not to say that she liked this person. Mary felt absolutely terrible. She didn't understand at all what to do because she didn't feel so self-confident. So the lady screamed that she had absolutely no other choice, and she absolutely did not like such suitors. She finally let out all her anger and admitted that this man spoke to her out of pity, and he was definitely not the king here. At that moment, Mary felt feminine strength within herself and understood that she absolutely should not follow the villains who especially insulted her. Orencia approached the young man and asked who dared to speak so arrogantly to the count's daughter. When the young man saw who approached him, his face immediately changed because he realized that this girl could do anything. Meanwhile, Euclid did not understand where Orencia had disappeared to this time, but the princess had already approached him from behind. She waited for the right moment to speak with the gentleman alone and asked for a little of his attention. Mr. Euclid looked at her silently, not understanding why the princess was so interested in him. Princess Selvarena is perceptive. She has a very good understanding of high society and political circles, and she has published a large number of scientific papers. Obviously, the queen is trying to set her daughter up with Euclid, but this girl is not so naive as to not know about the conversations that are going on here. The lady admitted that she had actually wanted to propose something to Mr. Euclid, and that it had sounded too presumptuous of her. At this moment, a real scandal was brewing in the hall, where Orencia tried to defend the honor of her friend. Seeing this, Euclid asked for forgiveness, because his companion had gotten into trouble. The princess was left standing alone, and the young man did not even talk to her, but immediately went to another. She assumed he was clearly playing the role of a loyal partner, and it was definitely a planned performance. This was not what the girl expected to see, because she was sure that the Duke should have surrounded her with attention. In her past life, it was at this banquet that she first met the heroine's ex-husband, and he approached her first. The scene was just like something out of a fairy tale, and the young man politely offered to dance with him. He was an aristocrat from a poor rural settlement, the main character of a love story, and in social circles they constantly talked about their wedding, and of course, real family life turned out differently. Hugging another girl right after the wedding, this story turned out to be far from fairy tale magic. It was at that very moment that the heroine became aggressive and cruel and eventually destroyed everything with her own hands. But the young man, swinging a knife at his wife, shouted angrily, his life was destroyed only because of this wedding. No wonder he hated his wife so much that one dark, late night he simply decided to kill her. Even in real life, the heroine remembered this story very well and the terrible feelings she experienced. And now in front of her stood that same ex-husband, a real villain, who immediately swung his hand at the lady who expressed her opinion. The heroine had no idea what could happen next, and at that second she only managed to close her eyes. But the courageous shoulder of Mr. Euclid appeared in front of her and grabbed the impudent fellow by the hand. Euclid looked menacingly at the villain and asked what the young man was doing such a thing at a social event. The young man said that it looked like there was a misunderstanding and it was just a small quarrel that didn't even require attention. He introduced himself as a baron from the Massetti family, whose holdings were on the northwestern border. Euclid promised to remember this name because in this man he saw a real impudent person who allowed himself to do something terrible. He left silently and did not say another word. The young man was perplexed as to whether their conversation would really continue. But now he understood that this mistake turned out to be much worse than he could have even imagined. Orencia stood nearby. Her gaze was sad, and with her hands folded she looked somewhere at the floor. Euclid hugged his companion and asked if everything was okay with her, and feeling protection and support, the girl's mood immediately improved. Victoria and her friend immediately ran up because they were incredibly worried about the condition of Mary, who found herself at the center of the scandal. The girl admitted that she was completely fine, but apologized to Orenzi, considering herself guilty that she had dragged the lady into this scandal. The heroine realized that this had never happened in the past, and she was sure that she shouldn't even think about it and needed to focus on something else. And now she was about to do something even worse. Turning to her friend Mary, who stood there in a soft pink dress. In front of everyone, she pointed to her attire and declared that this dress was very tasteless, because now Herencia was going to become a real villain. Herencia said that there were so many bows on the dress that it looked like she was 13 years old, there were too many accessories, and her outfit looked old-fashioned. So it's no wonder that people look down on her, because Mary has absolutely no taste. The heroine understood that this should be enough to prevent Mary from hating her for the rest of her life. But Mary suddenly came to the table and took a knife to cut off all the cute pink flowers from her own dress. The friends looked closely at what the modest and timid Mary was doing, who most likely would have simply cried and left earlier. Now the lady grabbed a knife and cut off all the annoying bows and roses to make the dress look more feminine. Herencia didn't expect this kind of reaction and just wanted to make a splash by saying that the dress was awful. But as soon as the lady cut off all the roses, the dress sparkled with different colors and began to look elegant, and Victoria again appreciated the lady's taste. They again praised Herencia, who had expressed her opinion, and the girls even thought that it would be good to remove and serve. No one was angry with her. The lady once again proved to be a delightful mentor, and Mary was incredibly glad that she pointed this out. The ladies went off to celebrate the banquet, and the heroine and Euclid were left completely alone. The heroine was starting to get a little irritated by this, and she decided to ask the gentleman the question directly, having learned the whole truth. She angrily asked if she had not been terrible at those moments, but the young man declared that the lady had been simply magnificent, and she didn't understand why her words didn't offend her friend, but only gave her confidence. Euclid admitted that it was very sweet of her, but the lady did not understand at all how she could now become a villain. Even at that moment, she felt doomed, as if she was failing at everything. Euclid thought that if he came with a companion, then fewer people would talk to him, and no one would touch on the topic of marriage. The heroine was a little angry, but her anger only touched the noble young man, because at that moment she looked very funny. Euclid even laughed, and thanks to her, he had a lot of fun today, which had never happened to him before. Looking at the lady, he admitted that he was incredibly grateful to her, and next time he promised to capture the attention of those present again. Herencia was puzzled as to why the young man was saying such words, since making such a facial expression was not at all according to the rules. The evening was full of intrigue, but at the same time all the guests had a great time and fun, and all the villains were punished. After the event, the Empress was so angry that she threw things around her room in anger and even broke a huge glass. She had been incredibly irritated by Euclid, but now he had Lady Herencia with him, who perfectly suited his role. Her daughter quietly entered her mother's room, because as she walked down the corridor she heard the sound of shards of broken glass. Without a second thought, she angrily threw the fan in her daughter's face, screaming that she was a pathetic child and had done nothing. A red abrasion from the blow appeared on the girl's face, and the Empress considered her behavior simply disgusting. Despite the mother's anger, the lady remained calm and asked her not to worry anymore, promising to meet Lord Euclid in person once all the gossip from the banquet had died down. After a wild party, Lady Herencia woke up in the morning in a great mood and was so calm because she was not going to do anything today. She has come to court, so now she must fulfill the duties of the heiress of the family. But the Novelita family had already acquired a bad reputation, and nothing could raise the prestige of this family. The heroine thought about what she should do and how to make new enemies, preferably something connected with people in power. While trying hard to come up with a new plan, an idea popped into her head, and she realized that this could be a great solution. Herencia was going to lend money to aristocrats and then torture them until they paid back their debt, and in her opinion there was nothing more disgusting than money. She had already prepared the documents and brought them to her father, but after carefully studying all the information, he stated that this was absolutely impossible. The heroine didn't understand what was wrong here. Her plan was well thought out and definitely should have worked. Father thought that if a lady wanted to lend money, it would be better to choose ordinary citizens and not bother with aristocrats. The daughter was outraged, saying that a noble life requires a lot of money, while ordinary citizens are on a completely different level. Even if the common people are indignant, they will never be able to harm the family. The loan was completely illegal, but the father said that if his daughter was so confident, she could get the initial capital. But if something goes wrong, he warned that he will not stand up for her, but his daughter promised that everything will be under control. She wanted to make sure that the whole family would be drawn into the scandal, and she was going to try hard. The father gave only 500 silver coins, and the lady was upset about what kind of business she should start with this money. It seemed to her that every plan of hers had failed, and wrapping herself in a huge down blanket, the lady wanted to escape from this world. Knowing that the business was doomed from the start, she didn't know how she could borrow money without having a penny. Agnes informed the lady that a visitor had come to her and said that he had a business proposal for the lady. The lady poked her head out from under the blanket with interest and asked who had come to visit her. This man turned out to be the owner of the studio, and with admiring eyes he called the lady simply incredible. Herencia didn't understand what was going on and why he was the one who came to her, since she had simply bought a dress from him. The young man said that every day dozens of people come to them for ladies' dresses, and the studio is now a huge success. The owner of the studio came with an offer and, with permission, asked to sell the dress under the name of Lady Herencia. This was just what the heroine needed. She asked how much the owner of the studio was going to pay her. The lady asked not to say that the owner was going to do it for free, and for one dress he offered 3 silver coins. But the heroine knew her worth, and she confidently asked for 30% of the net profit from the deal. Andre began to bargain, and initially offered 10%, but soon agreed to 25%, and the lady said that it would not be a problem for her if he did not release these dresses. But he needed her name, and the owner had no choice but to agree to her terms. The money seemed to come into Milady's hands by itself, and she happily reported that Andre had made an excellent decision. And if they were going to do something, they had to do it right, so the lady asked to call the artist first. Euclid's thoughts were occupied with many problems, and he thought that this cycle would never end. While riding in a carriage through the streets of the city, he suddenly noticed colorful leaflets that were flying all over the city. They interested his assistant Frederick and Euclid, and the young man wanted to know what it was. The leaflets definitely had Herencia on them. He noticed how she had lost weight. She was so skinny that her bones were even visible. The leaflets featured her figure in the same dark burgundy dress she wore at the banquet. Frederick was surprised because there really was a picture of the lady on the leaflets, but no one could understand why. Multicolored leaflets were flying all over the city, attracting the attention of passers-by, and it was impossible not to look at the image. Taking one of them, the young man began to carefully examine the photograph of Lady Herencia. On the flyer, the top store recommended incredibly luxurious dresses, new models this month, and these are the very dresses that everyone is talking about in Andre's store. Having made a deal with the owner of the studio, the girl began to meticulously calculate the profit received. And that left her with a whole 1,230 silver coins, which she managed to get simply by agreeing to have her photograph on the leaflets. But this still wasn't enough, and the heroine wondered if she really couldn't borrow money anywhere else. Her father had given her only 500 silver coins, and the lady wondered if perhaps someone else could lend her money. She thought about Mr. Euclid, who was probably grateful that she was with him at the banquet and would offer to become his partner again. He never said it, but in the girl's imagination, the boy should definitely offer her money, throwing bills right at her feet. She was sure that if she asked Euclid for money, he would definitely not be able to refuse her. The lady inquired about the financial situation of the Gratellos family, and Agnes was sure that these people were fabulously rich, and they said that they had gold mines. Herencia thought it was a great idea, but the maid asked in fear, wondering if my lady really wanted to borrow money from Lord Euclid. She thought it was the worst decision ever, but Herencia didn't understand why it was such a bad thing. Borrowing before the engagement is a bad thing, because it will make people think that the lady has a tragic past, but she has a bad habit of spending money on everything. Perhaps Euclid will be outraged that the girl is asking him for money out of the blue, and will decide to stay away from her. To be honest, it didn't sound that bad, but my lady was determined to achieve her goals. A few days later, Lady Herencia arrived at Euclid's palace on horseback and was greeted with joy by Frederick. He asked what brought the young lady here, since she had not even warned of her visit. Today, Mr. Euclid had too much to do, and there was a luxurious carriage standing in the yard, which meant that a guest had arrived. But the heroine didn't care at all, and bursting straight into the palace, she loudly shouted that she was asking for forgiveness. As expected from the Gratellos family, the palace was spotlessly clean, but the heroine still found a spot that needed dusting. And before he could even say anything, the lady was already confidently climbing the steps, straight into the gentleman's living room. The young man only managed to quietly say that Her Highness the Princess was here, but Rainsy probably didn't care anymore. A respectable lady was in the living room, sipping aromatic tea, and entered into a pleasant conversation with the gentleman. She wanted to find out some details about his decision, but the gentleman answered her too coldly. Euclid apologized, admitting that it was quite difficult to make such a decision now. But at that moment, a strange noise was heard outside the door. Herencia was going to visit Euclid for just a second, but he immediately recognized her voice. Without even finishing the conversation, he apologized to the princess, saying that he needed to go away because he was waiting for this man. Even from afar, he realized that Lady Herencia had visited his palace, and he was the first to open the door to greet the venerable lady. Frederick tried to stop the girl in every way, but she was too persistent. Euclid kindly asked the lady to go into the living room, not to stand in the doorway, feeling at home. None of the heroes understood what was happening here, but the one who was most perplexed was Herencia herself. After all, in the living room she saw the princess, who, smiling, admitted that they had met again in a completely unexpected place. Seeing the lady, the heroine looked at her in shock and did not understand what this girl was doing here. She offered tea or coffee, but as soon as the young man heard about coffee, he immediately burst out laughing. After all, he didn't want the heroine to pour it out on him, just like on Mr. Stein, but the lady had no idea why the young man was behaving so strangely. Herencia preferred to drink tea, and for the princess to see the couple together was extremely unexpected. First, she decided to apologize to the lady, but the girl didn't even understand what was going on. She asked not to blame Mr. Euclid for anything, because it was definitely unavoidable. But even after her words, the lady did not understand what she meant. The princess confessed that she had just proposed to Mr. Euclid and probably already guessed his answer. The princess was sure that the young man would agree, and Herencia falsely replied that it was probably just wonderful news. At this point, the young man suddenly apologized from the bottom of his heart for this situation and admitted that he should have asked for her hand. Herencia only came to ask him for money, but the story turned out to be too complicated. She even thought that the gentleman had eaten something wrong again, but Euclid admitted that his heart belonged entirely to Lady Herencia. Therefore, if the princess made the proposal only at the insistence of Her Majesty, he asked to reconsider his decision. The struggle for the throne between the two princes had been going on for several years, and it was an extremely fierce struggle. Without the intervention of the Gratellos family, things would have ended much more complicated. If the princess marries Euclid, Prince Bars will instantly become the crown prince. So the heroine realized that Euclid was using her to reject her proposal for a formal wedding. They immediately realized that now they would have to play the role of sweet lovers, because supposedly there had been talk about the wedding for 2 years already, and many were simply not aware of it. Herencia immediately accepted the role of a real villain. Now for her it was a real success. She kindly took Mr. Euclid's hand and confessed that she could no longer imagine life without his presence. Therefore, she will not be able to return Mr. Euclid in any way, and the princess was simply shocked by what she saw. Now Herencia played the role of a woman in love and tried to steal someone else's man right in front of the princess. After she left, the young man thanked the lady for playing along with him, but suddenly Herencia admitted that it was not a game at all. For now it was temporary sincerity, and now the young man did not understand at all what it all meant. He asked for help and she just helped him, and now she was wondering what to do about it. Euclid went against everyone, and this world was so unpredictable that it was absolutely impossible to betray anything. It was the perfect moment to ask for money for her help in principle. That's why the lady came here. Herencia actually asked Mr. Euclid to borrow silver or gold coins, a check or gold, anything. Euclid was surprised. Did they really need money? And the lady may be noisy, but she would never do anything bad. The lady admitted that she had already helped the young man once, but now the time had come when she needed help. Euclid wondered if the lady was in danger, since she would not come and ask him for money. The princess's carriage slowly drove away from Euclid's palace, and she realized that her plan had failed miserably. There are many different ways to force someone to marry, but the girl was thinking about how to do the right thing. She decided to do so and become the greatest enemy for Lady Herencia, so that Euclid would marry her, as her mother demanded. She wanted to be the one who could change a man with a heart of stone and outwit a treacherous mother. And the person who should be on her side is not Mr. Euclid at all, but Lady Herencia. The next morning, Herencia's mother and father went to the estate, and the girl was left alone in the palace. This meant that she was now the only one running the family while her father was away. She had to sort out family affairs, because her father continued to hide details from her. He said that the girl would certainly become the heir to the family, but he still didn't tell the whole story. While the lady was in her office, the butler announced the arrival of a new guest, but it was too early for a visit. The lady went into the living room and saw the stranger sitting on his knees, right in the living room, with his head bowed low and asking Milady for help. This morning turned out to be too unexpected, because a stranger showed up at the palace who now needed something. The young man asked to follow him, and the excited lady headed into one of the rooms of the palace. There was something strange going on in the room. The maid was standing there holding her brother's robe in her hands, but for some reason her starched collars were down from her shoulders. Herencia looked around the room and everyone in it to see what was going on. The young man insisted that he was simply changing clothes, but there were too many maids standing around him, and he began to make excuses about how the girls had simply burst into his room. Lady Herencia turned to the maid and wanted to know whether she helped him dress or whether he helped her undress. This was absolutely unacceptable behavior for the palace, and the heroine angrily declared that all the maids would undergo retraining. Milady kicked out all the servants and ordered that they not even return here in the near future. She promised to make sure that this didn't happen again, and she probably should have kept a better eye on the maids now that she was the heiress. Her brother only asked her to try harder, but she understood perfectly well that the maids were absolutely not to blame. Therefore, the lady said that only male servants would be presented to her brother to ensure that such a thing would not happen again. She knew he was always violent, but the young man couldn't believe that such a future awaited him. She was familiar with his vile nature, but it was not uncommon among high society, so she decided it was better not to focus on it for now. But the lady sternly declared that if the young man wanted to satisfy his lower body so much, he would have to do it outside the palace. After all, he really doesn't need to constantly touch what belongs to the Novelita family. At the same time, Mr. Euclid was waiting for Herencia, who was late, although he had not even warned about his visit. Suddenly, he heard that there was some kind of confusion in the corridor, and probably something had happened. The maids were gathered in the corridor, discussing the young master who had acted rudely again, but the young lady came to their aid. Upon seeing Euclid, the ladies immediately fell silent and asked for forgiveness for their inappropriate behavior. The young man wondered if the lady was so busy that she couldn't even come down to him. The maid wondered if the young master had done something to her, which was why she was so late. Everything was too strange, and recently Herencia asked for his help, and now Euclid thought that the Novelit family had big problems. She continued talking to her brother and couldn't believe that he suddenly decided to show his strength. The young man looked incredibly pathetic now, and his behavior only brought shame on part of the family. He instantly became angry and, picking up the first thing he could find, swung it at the lady, calling her arrogant. She didn't want things to come to this at all, because her brother simply needed to be put in his place. The very next second, the brother received a sharp blow to the face from Mr. Euclid, who again arrived in time. This young man seemed to be her savior, and he always appeared at the moment when the girl was in danger. She looked into his kind eyes and was even surprised why he was here now, as if he really was her savior, but Euclid immediately decided to ask if she really needed money to escape from her brother. Herencia tried to explain, he misunderstood, and now a completely different situation has occurred. She said it was all completely wrong, but Euclid was ready to pretend he hadn't heard anything. He decided to lend the girl as much money as she needed, and for the heroine this was already excellent news. Suddenly, the young man dropped to one knee, and the lady did not understand what he was going to do now. The young man carefully took out of his pocket a red velvet box containing a dazzling ring. He admitted that he wanted to offer more than just money. Euclid was an excellent swordsman and had many connections and promised to give everything he needed. And now he decided to make an official proposal to the girl. And presenting the ring, the gentleman said in a gentle voice whether my lady was ready to marry him. The stunned Herencia certainly didn't expect such a morning, and couldn't even breathe from everything that was happening. This morning was strange not only for Milady, but also for her mother, who today informed her father that she no longer intended to return to the capital. He said that the children were not her concern, and now she saw no point in returning there because the estate was well managed by the servants. Standing by the window, she made a radical decision, and her husband did not understand what had hit her in the head. The gentleman shouted at the servants to prepare for departure immediately, and since the lady was unwell, she would remain in the estate for now. He had only one last request left, and he turned to his wife asking if she would do what he asked. These were important family matters, and afterwards the father angrily declared that from that moment on, he would deal with all matters himself. Herencia was indignant and decided to talk to Euclid, asking what kind of nonsense he was talking about so early in the morning, having made an offer. The young man said that it seemed that the Empress would not leave him alone so easily, and the lady suggested that in that case he give in and simply marry the princess. At their last meeting, the heroine did not feel that they were on bad terms, and it seemed that even the Empress did not want to interfere with their union. Frederick had long since suggested that the gentleman meet with at least someone. The young man tried to find another candidate, but there were too many offers. Now everything became clear to the heroine, and she asked if the gentleman really thought that she was so kind and would immediately decide to help him. Euclid considered Milady a very intelligent girl, one who would be able to correctly assess profit and loss. He suggested that she read the engagement agreement, since a wedding contract would be too burdensome for both parties. In fact, the gentleman had never seen anyone get divorced after signing a marriage contract, and Herencia completely agreed with him. But an engagement contract can be cancelled at any time, and the girl also had her own reasons for proposing an engagement to him, so he assured her that they could achieve all this with just a contract. Perhaps getting engaged to Euclid wasn't such a bad idea, and the heroine suggested that she could borrow some money and immediately start a huge scandal. She agreed, but said that the young man needed to prepare himself because she was a wonderful actress, and everyone had to believe that they were madly in love with each other. Every day, the master's assistants loaded a full carriage, which was immediately sent to Lady Herencia's palace. The assistants noticed that it seemed that Duke Gretelos had really fallen in love with the lady, because he had been tirelessly sending gifts for a whole week. They were afraid that her father would find out about everything and go crazy. He was supposed to come back today, so they needed to hide everything until he arrived, and then everything would be fine. Suddenly, they noticed a carriage approaching the palace and realized that it definitely belonged to Duke Gretelos. No doubt he was leaving on it, which meant that the lady's father had returned much earlier than promised. The girl's father stepped out of the carriage. His gaze was darkened, and the aura around him was incredibly gloomy today. Seeing their master, the assistants almost dropped the boxes from their hands, and now they needed to hide all the gifts as quickly as possible. Everyone noticed that the Duke was not in the best mood, and the butler immediately turned to the gentleman. He asked for forgiveness, saying that the estate was still a bit dirty, and the Duke, according to him, had cancelled his business in order to arrive early. But he saw that the assistants were bustling about and carrying some suitcases, immediately recognizing that these were all gifts from Duke Gretelos. Ever since he proposed to Lady Herencia, he had been sending them every day, and the man looked angrily at everything that was happening. The butler noticed that the Duke was getting angry. He shouted for his daughter to be brought to him immediately, but the butler knew that not only Lady Herencia was in the palace, but the Duke himself, and now the lady was probably with him. The heroes were already preparing for a love drama, and the lady asked the young man to ruffle his hair and also take off his watch. What she needed now was a dramatic picture, and she cried out that it was not the watch that was the problem, but its appearance. The young man even rolled up one sleeve higher, but the lady screamed that all this was not suitable and that he needed to look completely different. She unbuttoned his tie and asked him to open his collar wider so that everyone would think that real passion was happening between them. It was necessary to make everyone think that they were real lovers, and at that moment the lady came so close to the Duke that he even became afraid. She didn't even expect such an act from herself, and she felt herself being carried away in the other direction, and this was absolutely not what she wanted to do. Ruffling her hair and giving her a cheeky look, the young man asked if the girl would probably like it. Looking at the gentleman, the lady realized that this was now the final result. Perhaps it was perfect, but she still lacked something. She screamed. She needed to cool down a little from strong emotions, and at that moment Frederick burst into the office. He waved his hands in fear and said that he was just about to knock, but the lady opened the door right in his face, and he decided to inform as soon as possible that Duke Novalita had come straight for his daughter and was asking to bring her immediately. Herencia slammed the door loudly in front of Frederick and asked him to wait a little, and the young man even recoiled from the loud slam. Now they had absolutely no time left and needed to come up with something, so the lady pushed the young man straight to the bookshelves. It looked like there was real passion growing between them as the young man was pinned against the wall, and the lady looked him in the eyes. The performance started off completely wrong, and Herencia asked the gentleman to close his eyes, saying that she was completely embarrassed. The lady gently touched his hand and pressed her whole body against the master's body, as if she was about to kiss him right now. She did it on purpose so that the father who came in would see a strange scene where his daughter was reaching out with her lips to the lips of her worst enemy. Frederick tried to stop the Duke, but his father would not hear anything and burst into his office, shouting where his daughter was. Naturally, he saw a strange picture, Euclid pressed against the wall, and his daughter hugging the Duke. He felt a strange tension, noticed wrinkled clothes and also fresh traces of lipstick on Euclid's neck. The Duke shouted that Gretelos had chosen someone unknown as his heir and asked his daughter to quickly come to him. Milady held tightly to her future husband's hand and declared that her father should under no circumstances be so angry. She asked him to apologize for his words, as her father had behaved too rudely towards their young couple in love. She warned that if the father does not want to see his grandson from God knows who, he should probably start keeping an eye on his brother, who has completely gone crazy. Herencia wasn't even afraid to tell that Evan had really squandered all the money in the theater, and her father indignantly shouted at his daughter to stop immediately, not daring to speak brazenly about his brothers. He asked her to come over immediately, saying that she would never dare to behave like that again, and he would take matters into his own hands. But at that moment, the Duke decided it was high time for him to intervene, and asking for forgiveness, he suggested that the Duke leave this office as quickly as possible. At last, the Duke left, and Frederick was very much afraid that something serious might happen, besides a quarrel. Since the maids had returned to the estate, everyone hoped that His Majesty would not be too harsh on his lady daughter. After the Duke left, Euclid asked if this was really how it had to be, since everything had only gotten worse, and the lady smiled and asked him not to thank her. Euclid understood that this was exactly how she wanted to show that she had sided with him, and now his father did not dare to give orders at all. The young man didn't even imagine that the Duke would be so unreasonable that he would burst into his palace and start shouting right in his office. Therefore, the young man confessed that he could not leave everything like this under any circumstances, because he saw how the father treated his daughter. Previously, the lady thought that this situation would end there, but now she looked at her future husband with a surprised look. At this time, the assistants were waiting for them to be released, because if one of them simply gave in, they would finally be free. Since the young men had seen everything, they continued to watch the scene of the two heroes, and for some reason the Duke still did not let Milady go back to his palace. Euclid had just realized how cruel her family was, but the lady insisted that it was nothing to worry about and that the gentleman had misunderstood. He asked her to just stay with him today because her father was incredibly angry today, but the lady hated control in relationships and did not want strange rumors to appear. The heroine was perplexed as to whether the young man was really suggesting that she go against her father now, stating that she didn't even have anything to wear, but fortunately the groom had already prepared and provided for everything. The maids brought out luxurious clothes, as well as a bunch of gifts, and today the girl certainly could not need anything. The Empress was immediately informed by an assistant that the lady had left the Gretelos estate early this morning. She didn't understand if there was really something between them, or if it was just a game to make everyone think that they were truly in love. But most of all, she hated the Duke, and it all happened when Lilier was the crown princess. Then a split occurred between the two families when Lady Gretelos did not find happiness with the prince. The crown prince was deeply in love with Lady Gretelos, but not everyone knew about their relationship. Rumors were circulating everywhere that once he became emperor, the current bride would be forgotten and Lady Gretelos would take the place of empress. The prince promised that he would definitely marry the girl, and she knows it perfectly well, but he never did. In the end, a completely different lady became empress, and then as now, everything happened exactly the same. The Empress was sure that the unworthy couple had to be destroyed before their love took deep root. She asked her assistant Burl to find a newspaper publisher, an obedient and competent publisher who would write an article that would benefit only her. The very next morning, the front pages of the newspapers were full of headlines that it was not Princess Selberina, but Lady Herencia, who had spent the previous night with Mr. Euclid. Of course, there was nothing wrong with that, but the heroine could not believe that the newspapermen had turned it into exactly that, as if the lady was trying to prevent the union of two lovers. The rumors could be easily gotten rid of, and they became a reason for new ones, and Rents was even ready to become a frivolous girl. But at that moment, Agnes said that they could not go anywhere, because after spending the night with the Duke, her father had placed her under arrest for a whole week. But today the heroine definitely wasn't going to go out through the door, and the maid was scared because they were on the second floor. That same morning, Euclid was brought all the issues of the latest newspapers from a new publisher, unknown, insignificant, and with a tiny capital. Everyone understood that Her Majesty the Empress was most likely behind this, and Euclid did not understand what to do for his poor bride, because she was probably shocked by this disgusting article. But the next second he realized that he was most likely too late, hearing the sound of approaching hooves. Frederick immediately saw Lady Herencia through the window, riding on horseback, approaching straight towards the Duke's palace. The young man was delighted it seemed his bride had come to him herself to discuss the latest gossip. She flew into the palace again and screamed. Probably everyone had already heard the exciting news that every resident of the empire was now talking about. Holding the newspaper in his hands, Euclid understood that they were talking about it, or that they had already read it. Thank you. What were they going to do next? Euclid admitted that he was just about to come up with something, and the lady understood that rumors had to be fought with other rumors, so she decided to make a bigger scandal. She asked if the gentleman knew a reporter, and she just happened to know a good portrait artist. Agnes and Frederick, having heard the plans of their masters, were definitely against it, and Euclid also doubted the new affair. Herencia said that putting everything on display was not interesting at all. People should be given the opportunity to fantasize. The locals were only talking about the upcoming wedding of Lady Novelita and the Duke's son, but just recently a secret article about the date came out, and it looks like everything was real, and the previous article was probably made up. Early in the morning, my father was already reading the latest edition of the newspaper, and as soon as he saw the first lines, he choked on his strong coffee, spitting it right onto the wall. The father was simply in shock and was ready to leave this world, while the butler stood next to him and tried to support him as best he could. The reaction of all the people was varied, because Mother Herencia, after reading the new article, simply laughed until she was crazy. She was sure that everything would turn out just wonderful, and her daughter definitely couldn't lose face. The shocking article announced that on a full moon, a woman on a white horse seduced a lion, and according to 4 servants, they talked all night and their songs never stopped. A new trend in relationships spread across the empire. It was simply an incredible, bold, and confident statement. But Herencia asked Agnes to shut up. The article went beyond all bounds, and the agitated lady asked the maid to simply bring her a glass of cold water. She herself now didn't even know how to react to the sensational article, because everyone was talking about the unconventional approach to the romantic relationship of newlyweds. The article even wrote about a secret relationship, and that the lovers were chained to each other. This cheap love triangle with Euclid turned into something exciting, where the lady demanded freedom against the oppression of ordinary relationships. Of course, she managed to spark a new scandal, but now she decided to go a different way and do what she had planned from the very beginning. As soon as Euclid and his mistress went out into the street, everyone immediately turned their attention to them. Herencia's friends thought the couple was simply gorgeous, and they looked so great together, as if they were made for each other. Even though one of her friends was in love with Mr. Euclid, she still thought they were a great couple. After all, they looked simply wonderful together, and in order to portray a couple in love, Euclid only said that Lady Herencia was incredibly beautiful. Her friend thought that interfering with their love was a real crime, but the heroes understood that they had to strictly follow the rules, when it was time to enter the game, and when it was necessary to retreat. They deliberately stood on the busiest street, chatting sweetly with each other, so that people would believe even more in the rumors about their unearthly love. Herencia considered herself a wonderful actress, and she could portray a lady in love as much as she wanted. And Euclid turned out to be a reliable partner who strictly followed all the instructions and looked at his companion with a sweet smile. The lady decided to ask if the offer was still valid when she asked the young man to lend her money. Euclid was still willing to make the deal, and the girl asked for 5,000 gold coins, but even this amount he considered too modest. He thought the girl would ask for more, and if this money was not enough, he just had to tell her, because this was the least he could do for his beloved. The young man's generosity knew no bounds, and these words even embarrassed the young lady a little. On the same day, the heroine, together with the maid, went to carry out her plan, where she gave some money to the poor. The atmosphere in the area was too squalid. Poverty and theft reigned, and Agnes hid fearfully behind her mistress's back. She pointed to an arena where competitions were taking place between poor people trying to earn money. There, people were gambling their lives, and it was really scary. Agnes, in fear, asked Milady to leave the area as quickly as possible, so as not to attract close attention to herself under any circumstances. But one of the poor men had already noticed the precious ornament on the lady's shoe, and he had terrible thoughts of robbing these ladies. The ladies noticed that a strange man began to follow them, and Herencia stopped and menacingly asked what he wanted. The maid was incredibly scared as soon as she saw the face of the formidable thief, who was probably going to blackmail them. But instead of attacking, the young man asked if it was really that very Lady Novelita standing before him. Taking off her hood, the girl admitted that he was not mistaken at all, and she was the head of a famous family named Herencia. The man continued to stand nearby, and the lady wanted to find out what was going on, because he had been following them for a long time. The young man looked like a real villain, and suddenly, embarrassed, he admitted that his thoughts were not at all appropriate. The lady told the villain that there was nothing wrong with it, and she understood perfectly well that he needed money. And this was the heroine's grand plan, who was going to lend the villain some money right now. When the maid came home, she was in tears, because she really thought that they would meet their end right in this backwater, but somehow the lady managed to find out that this man was the son of a nobleman. In fact, they met on the imperial floor. He looks much worse than just a couple of months ago, and probably the young man has big problems. Herencia knew that people like him didn't change with the snap of a finger, and perhaps he would soon ask for an even larger sum. Agnes listened attentively to her ladyship, taking in every word, but did not at all understand what her game consisted of. The arena was one of the few entertainments in the Empire where fierce battles between knights took place. But at the same time, this place was a place where dirty money was circulating for aristocrats who were ready to pay any amount for a magnificent spectacle. Agnes wondered if the young lady had decided to continue the business of the Novelita family, since they had certainly visited the poorest area for a reason. But in her heart, the maid was incredibly worried about her ladyship, who could find herself in an unexpected, dangerous situation. Herencia's father, the venerable Duke, asked Sebastian if all the important preparations had been completed. He thought it was a good thing, because it would be stupid if the great Novelita family suddenly went bankrupt. The reason for the Novelita family's wealth was hidden in endless wars, and the Duke never tried to earn it through honest work. All this time, the family traded in captive people, but the war ended, peace reigned, and overnight, everything changed. The terrible skeletons were kept in the closet of this family, and the Duke decided to offer the Emperor to present his business to the world. But the Emperor, who used his money without a twinge of conscience, finally turned away from him. Every one of the Duke's undertakings ended in failure, and the moment came when one day he had nowhere to run. As he thought, the Novelita family always does things their own way, but he strictly ordered Sebastian not to let his daughter know about the family's dark deeds under any circumstances. She was currently dealing with her own love affairs, so it was the perfect time for the Duke to keep the girl out of the family's affairs. He ordered Sebastian to contact Ghidorah, a ruthless crime city on the very outskirts of the Empire. At the head of the criminal town stood a young man who, during his long reign, managed to create an incredible aura of fear around himself. While in his office, he suddenly heard approaching footsteps, which meant that a guest had followed him. The assistant asked the gentleman for forgiveness for disturbing him, but an important message arrived, and the Novelita family decided to contact them. The young man, hearing this information, was surprised, because since when did the ducal family decide to turn to a criminal city? He smirked, realizing that this old fox of a duke definitely needed something from him this time. When Herencia took over the family's affairs, within just 1 week they received an incredible number of invitations addressed specifically to her. Milady asked the maid to lay out all the invitations for now, but Agnes had a slightly different opinion. It seemed to her that this time Milady should read the invitation herself, because some of them were extremely important and required her attention. One of the invitations was to a tea ceremony at the Imperial Palace from Her Majesty the Empress herself. When she read the invitation from the Empress, she realized that something special would definitely happen this time, because the Empress could not have sent it just like that. That same day, the lady went to see her future husband, and Frederick was incredibly happy to see her. Mr. Euclid was in the reception area right now, and the young man kindly asked the girl to come in, but it seemed they had guests today. The heroine urgently needed to deal with that terrible article, but it was being distributed by the Imperial Palace, and there were many more newspapers than it might seem. At the same time, Euclid was talking to a young man who represented only one single newspaper, and therefore could not stop the publication of all the others. The gentleman could not sit idly by, and he wanted to confiscate as quickly as possible all the newspapers that had distributed the outrageous article. Herencia came into the office and asked what was going on, and it didn't seem like the two were just chatting about nothing. Euclid said it didn't matter, and everything was going according to plan, but the heroine understood that she had several of these plans. The gentleman ordered everyone to leave the room immediately so that he and the lady could be alone for an important conversation. He talked about a plan to escape from home because he understood perfectly well that he was not ready to tolerate such an attitude from his father and brothers. They were still talking about this, but the lady had already spoken before. He had misunderstood everything, and she still hadn't borrowed money from him. In fact, the gentleman wanted to protect his future wife, and even offered to stay here if she really wanted to run away from home. He offered complete safety from his father, who would never dare to attack the ducal family. The assistant warned the gentleman that the carriage had already been served and that the young man needed to go about his business as soon as possible. Therefore, Euclid stated that he had absolutely no time to go into details and that the girl would be better off agreeing to his terms. Having given her his hand, he expected that Milady would definitely agree, because staying with him was much better than returning to her formidable father. He suggested that they spend the day together, carefree and joyful, and take a little break from everything that was happening. Euclid claimed that it would be beneficial from all sides, but the heroine did not understand whether this was also part of his sparkling plan. They went to the arena where the battles between knights were taking place, and all the stands were full of spectators. Everyone was watching closely and betting on who would win, and there was a lot of money hidden in these tournaments. Herencia was worried. Scandals broke out again on a large scale, and this was strange, because the Empress had never acted so actively. The lady realized that perhaps this was the reason why the Empress had sent her an invitation to meet in person. She told Euclid that the Empress had invited her to a tea ceremony at the Imperial Palace, and if you think about it, she had called her to get a reaction to the article. Everything seemed to be starting to cross acceptable boundaries, because the Empress and her daughter clearly wanted to find out all the girl's secrets, as well as follow her. The arena was a place where real brutal bloodshed took place, where knights fought for the sake of getting big money. Seeing this spectacle, the girl felt a little uneasy, because blood was constantly splashing in all directions in the arena. The girl closed her eyes, and Euclid began to worry about her condition. But the very next second, she declared that she was completely fine, and the young man suggested leaving if the lady was uncomfortable. At that moment, a noble lady approached them and decided to greet Mr. Euclid. It was Madame Bovary, who admitted that it was a great rarity to see a gentleman in the Colosseum. Herencia greeted Madame Bovary politely and was also incredibly pleased to make her new acquaintance. Madame Bovary is the magic megaphone of high society, and it is said that if she takes it into her head, she can spread rumors throughout the capital in just one day. This woman was incredibly cunning, and as soon as she found out anything, the information immediately spread to all her acquaintances. She apologized for interrupting the young people, but that was probably why Euclid had called Herencia here. Bovary only needed to see the sweet couple together, and she left immediately, wishing them a pleasant time. Euclid saw the girl's tense state and asked if she didn't like it here. Indeed, on the one hand, the lady was not happy with everything that was happening, and she felt uncomfortable here. She looked at the rude and strange people sitting in the stands, and they were all incredibly disgusting to her. Then the young man asked what about him, and whether she also had some kind of aversion towards him. After all, it was he who brought her to this place, which means that Herencia should now simply hate the gentleman for such an unpleasant walk. After these words, the young man became embarrassed and realized that he should not have asked such a strange question. He didn't like forcing people to stay where they were not comfortable, and suggested that the girl leave this terrible place immediately. A black carriage, drawn by noble horses, slowly moved along the cobblestone street as night fell on the street. The lady asked where they were going, and if possible, the young man suggested going to the Gretelos estate. And did the gentleman really want Herencia to run away like that? But she herself said that the Empress invited her to a tea ceremony, and the Duke happily offered to lend her the carriage and assistance of their family, so that the lady would come to the Empress on his behalf, so that no one would have any more doubts. Herencia immediately realized that this would definitely infuriate the Empress, and this was exactly what she needed right now. She told Agnes that she was going to run away that evening, and for the maid, it looked more like a preparation for married life than an elopement. The maid was amazed at how many incredibly luxurious dresses and exquisite jewelry there were in the Duke's palace. The butler wished Milady a pleasant rest, but she still had one small request. She was indignant did no one fill her bath, saying that the butler did not follow the basic rules, but here usually only the master gave orders. Herencia claimed that a true servant should be able to foresee what the master wants and not wait until he is ordered to gather all the servants the following morning. A real villain had to behave exactly like this, and the heroine couldn't wait until the morning to show herself in all her glory. She wanted to make a bunch of enemies for herself so that everyone would hate her, and her mere presence would make everyone sick. Early in the morning, Frederick came to the gentleman to tell him about an article that had appeared in the newspaper. This was another stunning piece of news that shook the entire public. Euclid had already seen her and realized that it seemed the Empress was really trying to raise a fuss. Suddenly, a loud female voice was heard from behind the office door, which for some reason had been shouting throughout the palace since early morning, and when they opened the door, they saw all the maids. Herencia stood and shouted that in the morning the servants should serve a warm towel, tea to clear the mind, and cold water to invigorate. An angry voice was heard throughout the palace, and the lady was outraged by the disorder in the laundry, telling the maids that it was necessary to use the right soap so that the linen was always clean. One of the maids raised her hand and said, and the head maid warned them that they should be frugal in such expenses. Now my lady wanted to know who the head maid was here, why she was giving such orders. The head maid, who was in charge of this estate, stepped forward and showed her face. It was her job to train the estate's maids, but Herencia was outraged. Cheap soap ruined the fabric and could harm the maids' hands, and what was the point of saving money on soap? The head maid said that if one day Herencia became a Grand Duchess, it would be a different matter, but for now this was her job, and she was just a guest here who was overstepping her bounds. At that moment, the heroine realized that the lady was indeed right in her words, and she had nothing to answer. She merely admitted that the head maid had been too rude and tried to justify her indecent behavior. But at that moment my lord appeared and asked what was going on here and what it all meant. He glanced at the head maid, who had supposedly never made a mistake before and always kept an eye on the servants. She lowered her head, realizing that my lord could be extremely stern, and he had heard the entire conversation perfectly well. Euclid was angry because the head maid said that his bride would never become a Grand Duchess. Therefore, he ordered that from today onwards the head maid is free and must leave the estate as soon as possible. Herencia didn't think it would turn out this way because she just wanted to be rude. She admitted that firing the head maid was too much, since this was only their first conversation. It seems like this lady has been working here for a long time, and to fire someone so easily is reckless. Indeed, the head maid had worked here for a long time, and during that time she had managed to appropriate some property from the estate. Barley reported to the gentleman several times, but the amount seemed insignificant, and the gentleman knew her from the time when he himself was little. He could not teach someone new, and he simply did not have time. So he decided it was a small problem and just closed his eyes, but now he realized it was the right decision, and she became arrogant. The head maid always got away with everything, but now the heroine learned how the lady tried to appropriate some of the wealth. At first, she seemed honest and pedantic to her, and she would never have thought that this lady was capable of such a thing. Agnes carefully prepared Herencia for the meeting with the Empress, and was sure that the girl looked simply magnificent and was bound to win today. The maid always praised her mistress because Milady was her best friend and faithful mistress. When the girl was almost ready, she heard a pleasant male voice that wanted to enter her room. Milord asked for forgiveness for coming so unexpectedly, but he knew very well why Herencia would have to leave today. She was just about to have tea with the Empress. The young man came to find out the details. His gaze was wary, and for some reason the gentleman was extremely excited about the upcoming tea party. The gentleman said that he thought that perhaps it would be better for the girl not to go there today, and Herencia did not understand what the reason was. This time, the Empress had really heated things up, and it wasn't something that could be fixed with a couple of articles, and since he couldn't go with her, he suggested postponing the tea party for another day. Milady understood that the gentleman was worried about her as a partner, but she stated that she was really good at dealing with annoying and unpleasant people, so she was going to set out on the appointed day to prove to the Empress that her power was worth absolutely nothing. She asked Euclid to trust her and not to worry in any way, and to calmly begin his work. The young man understood perfectly well that his future wife was ready for anything and incredibly self-confident, but still he was very worried. Therefore, he offered to at least allow him to accompany the girl to the carriage, in order to calm his raging emotions a little. The gentleman offered his hand to the young lady in a dress of the color of the sky, who was ready to meet the Empress herself and defend her honor. The newspapers still did not shut up and wrote articles about the revelation of the strongest relationships. Reading the first article, the Empress understood that one article could be covered by 2 others, but they would never cover 20 articles. The Empress used such base methods that even her daughter found them downright disgusting. And didn't Mother understand how pathetic and ridiculous she looked now, trying to persuade people who wrote false articles? Such feigned glory had no real value, and the Empress's daughter understood this perfectly well. And she saw a truly bright person who deserved respect in a completely different lady. Greteloth's black ducal carriage pulled up to the Empress's palace, and that meant the game had just begun. An incredibly luxurious lady emerged from the carriage, wearing an elegant dress decorated with pearls. And the Empress's daughter understood that even when this girl did nothing special, she was still worthy of respect. The Empress and her daughter were already awaiting the arrival of the guest invited to tea. The Empress's daughter immediately noticed that this magnificent girl radiated her own light, which could not be overshadowed by stupid, lying articles. She is so self-confident that even her mother cannot tarnish her honor, no matter what base deeds she tries to do. That same day, Euclid was going to meet with Herencia's father, who had not sought to meet him for a long time. The Duke did not even greet the gentleman and angrily asked where his daughter was now. Euclid said that the young lady had a meeting today, so he would hardly be able to meet her, and the father was surprised. Would he really not be able to see his own daughter? He was sure that the young man was making her go through this and still claimed that their relationship was sincere. The Duke intended to take his daughter back home so that she would never have any contact with Greteloth's family again. Euclid stated that the Duke must have more important matters to attend to, and perhaps it had to do with Lord Elbers. The Duke did not understand how Euclid knew everything, but he planned to handle the young lady's affairs himself and asked the Duke not to worry too much about it. Lady Herencia sat at tea with the Empress, feeling the dull atmosphere that was too predictable. The Empress continued to start pointless quarrels, and to be honest, the heroine had no idea what the princess was thinking at that time, looking stunned. All this time she tried to remain silent, but at one point the Empress turned to her daughter. She heard that recently she and Mr. Euclid had been exchanging letters, of which there were even too many. The princess laughed and confirmed that they were indeed exchanging letters about what color would suit Lady Herencia's face and what kind of jewelry women liked. He sent a huge letter full of various questions, and the Empress noticed what a kind heart her daughter had. After all, she so easily allows the man she often sees to talk about other women. The Empress declared that a woman must have a pliable side, declaring that her daughter would make a wonderful wife, having a long newspaper at hand, ready to print for herself. At this moment, another person appeared at the tea party, and it was the well-known Prince Barlos. Looking at the guest, he admitted that he had stopped by to see his mother on the way while he was on his way to take care of important business. Seeing the young Lady Herencia here, the prince openly looked at the lady, because he was probably thinking about her too. The young man laughed and asked if he had interrupted the conversation of the lovely ladies, while the Empress assured him that his words were complete nonsense. The atmosphere became increasingly tense, and Herencia immediately sensed that something was wrong. The prince noticed the girl and admitted that the lady was getting prettier day by day, but in any case, she was not going to indulge his smirks. The compliment directed towards Herencia did not please her at all and left her perplexed. The prince declared that it would not be at all gentlemanly to compare one woman with another, especially since he was going to love and cherish only one woman for the rest of his life. Barlos began to praise romantic relationships, and the heroine realized that this was exactly what the Empress had planned: to bring the princess, his daughter, together with Euclid, and to connect her with his son, Prince Barlos. But this was not a matchmaking service at all. Now the heroine incredibly wanted to return back to the Duke's house, and she only sighed heavily, looking at the stupid fake performance. Suddenly the Empress turned around and saw a man in a black formal suit, asking what he was doing here without an invitation. The stunned princess and her brother watched the appearance of the unexpected guest, and Herencia felt an incredible sense of relief because she finally saw the man who had just saved her again. Euclid admitted that on his way from an audience with His Majesty the Emperor, he decided to stop by briefly to check out the situation. He also wanted to take his beloved back to the estate, and the Empress understood that she would not be able to go against the Duke. Herencia immediately became happy and jumped up from her chair, hugging the young gentleman, who arrived just in time. The young man asked Princess Selberina when they had actually seen each other for the last time. The princess understood that in order to preserve the honor of Her Highness, a new article in the newspaper would be required, but with different edits. The Empress looked angrily at the Duke, hating him with every cell of her soul in this situation. She was absolutely powerless. Sitting in the carriage, Herencia learned that the Duke had even had to make some adjustments to meet with His Highness today, although he had not said anything in advance. In fact, Euclid simply wanted to see Herencia, and fortunately, His Majesty immediately granted his request for an audience. Herencia was glad that she had managed to escape from this terrible event where the false imperial family tried to draw her into their intrigues. But after that, the lady looked upset and did not like what was happening at tea time at all. She said it was a bad habit, and the young man was a little upset because neither with money, nor beauty, nor power, he could not impress Herencia, who always said that nothing would come of it. His bride turned out to be a truly complex person, and the lady required a certain approach. But the young man was ready to do anything so that the lady would not doubt him for a second. The next day, a new article came out about a couple who are not afraid of false reports, and again it was about Mr. Euclid and his mistress. Milady was reading the newspaper attentively, and the maid was worried, offering Miss a cup of green tea to calm her nerves. Agnes was worried about her mistress and saw that for the second day she was too upset and hardly spoke to anyone. For some unknown reason, Milady did not look very well, and her cheerfulness seemed to have faded. As Agnes thought, the lady must be going through emotional difficulties, even though she doesn't show it. Suddenly, the lady jumped up from her chair without explaining anything and ran towards the gentleman's office. With an incredibly serious face, she opened the doors and didn't even greet anyone, because the rules of etiquette were completely unimportant to her now. Euclid was surprised to see Herencia in his office, and the young men also had fresh issues of new newspapers in their hands. The heroine suddenly stated that it seemed she should return home as soon as possible to sort out family matters. All this time the Duke was incredibly angry, and even the servants were afraid to come close to him. Sebastian decided to tell the gentleman some urgent news that clearly required his attention. He asked Sebastian what had happened and whether they had managed to find confirmation of the facts they had discussed earlier. It turned out that the lady whom young Mr. Elbers was pestering was a distant relative of Empress Lilier. Security around Gratello's villa had recently been tightened, so the young lady was most likely there now, although her father was confident that the matter had already been properly resolved. But for some reason this girl was still in the Duchy of Gretelos without his permission, and he was wondering what to do about it. After Sebastian's message, the Duke angrily declared that he must personally meet with Her Majesty the Empress, and do so as soon as possible. After ordering Sebastian to prepare the carriage immediately, he headed out of his office to meet the Empress right away. Too much had already happened, and the heroine was in a depressed state, deciding to admit that everything she did to become a villain was in vain. All her dirty tricks, rude words, planned actions did not work, making her only a great lady, whom all ladies want to be like. She was only a nominal heir, so she knew absolutely nothing important about her family, and did not even know what kind of person her father was. And the Empress, who clearly hated her, was not yet able to show real power to humiliate or insult the dignity of the Novelite family. Instead of a complete collapse of her reputation, the lady gained fame as a young noblewoman who advocated social reform for the benefit of all women. People thought perhaps she should have changed her tactics from the start, but she was desperately trying to become the real villain of the empire. And she made an important decision that first of all she had to take a serious step that even she herself did not want. The first thing she decided to do was to start distancing herself from Euclid so that the rumors about their relationship would finally die and everyone would forget about this couple. She felt with all her heart that Euclid was a wonderful, good person who was always ready to come to her aid. His sincerity and honesty were simply amazing, because this man had a high title, and usually the soul of such people was dirty and callous. But this man didn't care about wealth, he cared about kindness, and he was the kind of person you couldn't help but like. This decision was incredibly difficult for the young lady, but she understood that her future could depend on it. She couldn't allow someone like him, caring and gentle, to be drawn into her dirty fight. Therefore, the heroine did not say anything, but simply collected all her things and left without warning after lunch, leaving behind an empty room. Euclid understood that his bride could be so cold, but this news upset him incredibly. Frederick admitted that there was much more important information, and Mr. Euclid should find out about it right now. He said the boy had taken on too much when he took on the internal investigation at the Colosseum, and Frederick was probably scared of something. He simply could not understand why the gentleman had deviated so much from the intended path since they had not even begun to act yet. The young man was influenced by the day when he and the lady arrived at the Colosseum, and she saw terrible battles. Then she behaved too strangely, but assured that she was completely fine. But in fact, what happened probably caused unpleasant feelings in her. Euclid was more concerned that the girl would not accept anything he tried to give her, so he decided to force it upon her. Frederick had already followed the affairs of Novalit and also checked, and it seemed that the family had not interfered in the affairs of the Colosseum for quite some time. The gentleman could not even understand whether he was upset or relieved by the information he had received, but it was as if after the lady's departure he felt empty. The next morning, Agnes ran to tell her mistress that the nobles were now competing with each other for the opportunity to poach their maids. The maids of this house did their job well, and everything worked out thanks to the strict instructions given by Milady. In any case, word of this spread throughout the empire, and the maids began to receive offers of employment, but of course they refused them all. They wanted to continue working here. Even the new uniform that the lady had recently ordered was simply a sensation, and the maids were glad that the fabric was pleasant and comfortable. In fact, when the lady ordered this uniform, she specifically chose the cheapest fabric, and she couldn't believe why the maids were so happy now. She again found herself at the height of respect, and the servants were delighted with the behavior of their mistress, and did not agree to leave for other houses for any amount of money. Herencia collapsed on her soft bed, declaring that she was tired enough, and asked Agnes to tell everyone that she was going to bed early tonight. That evening, the Duke returned to his estate and inquired whether anything had happened while he was away. The butler said that the young lady had returned this afternoon, and the father could not believe that his daughter was in the palace right now. In a conversation with the Empress, she admitted that the Duke was really upset by something so ordinary. After all, it is common for young people at this age to do certain things, promising to talk to this child so that the Duke does not suffer and does not worry. The Duke was grateful to the Empress for the mercy she had shown during the audience. That evening, the Empress admitted that the Duke's daughter was quite nice and was probably going to make him an interesting proposal. She reported how she had recently seen his daughter next to her son at a tea party, and they looked as if pictures of two lovers had come together. This was the Empress's insidious plan, and without the participation of both parties, she simply wanted to bring together his daughter and the prince, who was to become the heir. The Empress told the Duke that they were now in the same boat, and the Duke understood that he had to follow the terms, and that it would be better for both families. When the Duke returned home, he asked what his daughter was doing, but she said she was tired, so she went to bed early. He ordered the butler to bring Herencia to him early in the morning, because he and his daughter were planning a serious conversation. The Duke came up with a terrible plan to force his daughter to become a real crown princess, and not just the wife of the Grand Duke, but for now the heroine was sleeping peacefully in her bed and had no idea about it. Getting up early in the morning, the heroine thought that her father would immediately start yelling at her because she had not said a word and had simply run away from home. But when she saw her father, she realized that this man was suspiciously kind today, so suspiciously that it sent shivers down her spine. Herencia felt that something was definitely going on here, and putting a mug of hot tea on the table, she prepared to listen to him. The father said that it was time for his daughter to learn about the family business, which the family has been involved in for many centuries, and this business is passed down from generation to generation. It so happened that the father had to go to Ghidorah tomorrow, and he said that it would be useful for his daughter to go with him. Ghidorah was the name of the land that was blessed by the gods, as they once said, but in an instant everything was destroyed thanks to the efforts of other people. The blessing was one day exhausted by the declaration of a certain famous emperor, and from then on these lands became the most terrible place in the entire empire. He believed that since Ghidorah was a land blessed by the gods, the people there would repent and live righteous lives, so from that moment on, they decided not to arrest criminals in that city. This was an utterly absurd logic, and hordes of criminals headed to Ghidorah, turning this blessed place into a living hell filled with theft and murder. The once peaceful city has become the criminal capital of the empire, and the Duke and his daughter decide to head straight into the heart of the criminals and thieves. The maid was trembling with fear as soon as they stepped onto the threshold of this city, and she begged the mistress to ask if we really needed to be there too. Herencia didn't understand why her father sent her to a criminal city, but she knew that something was definitely fishy there. They were met by the city's biggest villain, who was delighted that the crime scene had been visited by Duke Novelita himself, since he could no longer remember how much time had passed since their last meeting. The young man was sure that this meeting could be interesting, and it was quite unusual to see noble gentlemen in such a dangerous place. Looking at the lady, he realized that the Duke had brought with him someone new, a child who from now on was to inherit his affairs. He came close to the girl, who looked proudly into his impudent eyes and did not even twitch a single muscle on her face. She asked if the young man was really craving a special invitation to introduce himself, looking intently into her eyes. The young man dropped to one knee and asked for forgiveness, giving his name as Raisil, and he was a small businessman from the most criminal city. Smiling, Raisil stated that he was simply stunned by the beauty of the young lady, and he was terribly rude in apologizing. Herencia asked not to allow such treatment in the future because she knew her worth very well. But now Raisil was going to show who was really in charge in this territory. With a wave of his hand, a purple magical vortex appeared in front of the heroes, controlled by Raisil himself. But he definitely couldn't be a wizard, and it's quite possible that he simply used a magic item, since that was allowed in a criminal city. He wanted to show his power and authority, and Herencia even closed her eyes because she could not look at such a blinding bright light. Raisil asked Duke Novelita and the young lady Novelita to follow him to show him where they had arrived. He declared that it was a great honor for him to receive such distinguished guests in their modest city, and opening the gates of the territory, he invited them into criminal Ghidorah. Before them was an exquisitely decorated palace with servants, and Herencia realized that this was definitely some kind of fake game. The young man probably thinks that with his tricks, he will scare the girl, making her simply tremble with fear. Milady simply asked to be escorted to the office to discuss some conditions of the meeting. Raisil informed the servants that these were very important guests and ordered everyone to take them to the guest room. The servants bowed almost to the floor after listening to their master's orders, and the lady who entered attracted the attention of another hero. This man was somehow connected to Mr. Euclid and decided that it was worth informing him about it immediately. At this point, Frederick and the gentleman were talking about how someone had dared to treat them so terribly, and the assistant was perplexed that they had come such a long way from the Baron's house, and now they were being told what to do. Frederick sometimes reacted emotionally to certain matters, and the gentleman calmly asked him to stop. He also reported that Herencia had not yet returned to the estate, but he heard that the lady had left with her father on business. Euclid suspected something was wrong, because the lady had not reported any important matters, and he certainly did not know about it. Frederick also had no information. Rumors are found that Novelita's finances have been in trouble lately, and they whisper that they are gathering the old team. The old crew were people from a crime town, and it seemed the Duke was going to drag his daughter into the terrible family affairs of the past. At that moment, another assistant came into the office rejoicing, and from his agitated look one could understand that something had happened. They just received a message from the Blaze, who are currently undercover in the crime city of Ghidorah. The young man said that Mrs. Herencia had just appeared in the crime city, and Euclid couldn't believe how such a thing could really happen. Raisil took out a bottle of expensive alcoholic drink and asked if the young lady was not in a romantic relationship with Duke Gretelos. He saw an article about it in the newspaper and became curious about how Mr. Fleet fell in love with the girl. The young man admitted that for him, he was nothing more than a friend in quotation marks, and he became interested in how the gentleman treated the lady. And at that moment, Euclid understood who she might encounter in this criminal town, the most terrible villain he knew very well. Sitting down at the table, the young man gathered to discuss, and Raisel asked contentedly whether the Duke really wanted to return to business, since he had already prepared certain places. The head of the criminal city said that they could only supply goods, but the Duke asked not to worry about it, because it was not the first time he had done this. For Raisel, this was simply wonderful news, and the Duke himself wants to return to the gang of the criminal city. He also stated that it would not be easy to find an employee as good as the famous Novelita family. Herencia listened attentively to the conversation, and the conversation was about the first product, which was of decisive importance, and the head promised to definitely choose a person with a pleasant appearance. The heroine felt that this guy reeked of suspicion he was the true head of the criminal city, although he looked too young for that. He spoke as if he were a friend of Euclid, and Herencia had no idea what the hell was going on here. Gretelos and Godora were like a nuclear bomb, and this mixture was even stranger than Gretelos and Novelita. Suddenly, an assistant ran into the office and informed Lord Raisel that they had uninvited guests. The chief asked how uninvited these guests were and why they had arrived in the crime city right now. He looked angrily at the assistant and asked if he was really allowing 3 people to barge in while he was busy with important guests. But the assistant assured them that the people were too strong and they would not be able to cope with them because Mr. Euclid Gretelos had arrived in the criminal city. The 2 worst enemies unexpectedly met each other because in the video he tried to arrive in the criminal city as quickly as possible. And as soon as he learned that Herencia was here, he hurried to meet his old friend. No one expected the Duke to burst into the criminal city so unexpectedly, and Herencia, along with her maid and father, watched their meeting with bated breath. No one knew how it happened, but the young men walked into the large hall, holding sharp swords in their hands. They were probably going to fight, and it would all start when my lady raised the white flag. The chief was indignant because the signal for the start was the lowering of the flag, and the Duke angrily asked why the young man was picking on his every word. The young men were unnecessarily angry because it was only a simple question, and it was obvious that they were deliberately being sarcastic with each other, trying to make each other look stupid. For some reason, the 2 hated each other incredibly much, and Herencia waved the flag and screamed for them to just get it over with and start fighting already. The atmosphere of the criminal city thickened as if before a storm. Their long-standing feud, fueled by betrayal and lust for power, reached its climax. Raisel, known for his cunning and lightning-fast reactions, drew his sword, the steel of which flashed in the dim light of the alleys. And today, before the eyes of all residents, the fate of their confrontation was to be decided. Their blades crossed with a deafening ringing sound that sent shivers down the spines of the spectators. The sword fight was watched by an excited maid, and Herencia stood with an impassive face. The first minutes of the fight were furious and merciless. Blows followed one after another, causing the air to whistle with tension. The Duke, like a battering ram, pressed on the enemy, trying to break his defense, and soon he succeeded. He asked Herencia to announce and raise the white flag so that everyone would understand that the competition was over. The lady solemnly declared that the victory was Lord Euclid's, where his opponent did not even have a single chance. Raisel laughed and appreciated his old friend's skills, which were still impressive, and he was very good at fighting. He called him as unbearable as ever, and the Duke said the boys simply hadn't trained at all. Looking at their communication, the heroine could not think whether they were enemies or friends, because these young men seemed strangely close. But suddenly Raisel declared that perhaps he had found the Duke's weak spot, and he was absolutely sure of it. The Duke shouted at Raisel to stop talking nonsense, and the boy laughed, claiming it was just a simple joke. The lady was getting pretty tired of watching their antics and asked when they would be going home. The Duke informed Raisel that he had one proposal that the young man would have to hear right now. And no matter what Duke Novelita offered him today, Euclid promised to pay 10 times more. So he confidently declared that the deal with the Duke was definitely off, something the man had never expected. The head of the criminal city didn't care at all who he dealt with, because he only cared about net profit. The lady began to get very nervous and asked the Duke what he was doing and why he decided to contact this man. Rysel smirked and asked if that meant Gretelos wanted to become a partner in the dangerous business. Herencia was definitely against it and asked Euclid to stop doing his blue deeds, but the young man confidently stated that he agreed to the deal. The Duke was outraged to the point of madness, declaring that this was absolutely unacceptable, and asked Rysel to remember the long relationship between Ghidorah and the House of Novelet. They had been in the same boat for a long time, and the Duke was sure that he had no right to refuse him, but the Duke, with a grin, asked him to change boats and get into another one. And if the Duke wants to go for a ride, wouldn't it be better to take a bigger and stronger boat? All this made Milady extremely nervous because she did not want the Duke to get involved in dark criminal affairs. At that moment, Rysel came very close to the lady and looked her straight in the eyes, deciding to ask just one single question. What does the lady think about this? How should he proceed? And her opinion is supposedly extremely important now. Milady understood that this man was playing a dangerous game, and she had to behave exactly the same way and think like a criminal. After yesterday's meeting, my lady slept for a very long time because she was incredibly tired from the unexpected events. The Gretelos family was said to be very good at handling any business, and she was confident that the Duke could handle even the criminal world. Last night, the Duke decided to accompany his mistress and her maid to a completely different place, where he invited her to spend the night. As it was already quite late, he declared that it would be better for the girl to stay the night here, and this was his inn where she could rest in peace. The heroine wondered if people really stopped in such places, but for some reason decided to refrain from such an offer. The Duke decided to sleep on the street at best, so as not to be indebted to the Gretelos family under any circumstances. The young man grinned, because the Duke, like a child, refused to get out of the carriage and offered to at least take a look at his room. Eventually, the father changed his mind and agreed to spend the night where the Duke suggested staying. Agnes had already woken up early in the morning and knocked on the lady's door, asking if she could come in. Mr. Euclid prepared clothes for her, and the maid did not take anything, because she did not think that they would spend the night in a completely different place. She was outraged, because frankly speaking, his lordship could have warned her in advance. If he had simply said that the journey would take a whole day one way, she would at least have been able to prepare. It was all too strange, and what was happening reminded the heroine of some event that had happened. She couldn't understand how Euclid had managed to get from the capital to Ghidorah so quickly, since the journey there took a whole day. Mr. Euclid walked to his office along a long corridor with huge windows that illuminated the beautiful decoration of his luxurious palace. He suddenly turned around because he felt someone's presence nearby, and his senses were not failing him today. At that moment, a young man in a cloak with emerald hair flew into the window and asked if the Duke had received what he wanted, because he was in shock when the young man contacted him. This man had already found out that the Duke himself was capable of using teleportation magic, but he still didn't want to be discovered by the magic tower. So Euclid asked his friend to refrain from using magic in public, and today he was colder than ever. They had known this man for many years, and he was a magician who helped the Duke whenever he asked for his help. After receiving his reward, the young man declared that the Duke could always rely on him and used teleportation magic again. The Duke hated the tower very much, and he had a special reason for this, and the young man simply did not want to attract more attention to himself. But the magician insisted that the old head of the tower was not ready to forget about the Duke, and he should gather his courage. He called him Mr. Gifted Magician, but no one knew what other secrets the Duke kept. Lady Herencia went out with her maid to meet and talk with the master. Suddenly, the young man asked her to make a choice, and she had to make it right now. Euclid warned whether the lady was willing to return with him to the Gretelos estate of her own free will, or to be kidnapped and taken there by force without her father's permission. Herencia was indignant that there was no option where she would return to the Novelita estate, but the Duke did not want his bride to end up in a dangerous place. The heroine only opened her mouth, intending to clarify some points because she wanted the game to be played exclusively according to her rules. The Duke had already been under the power of this strange misunderstanding for quite some time, but the heroine assured that Novelita had not exposed her to any danger. The young man was not at all surprised, and thought that perhaps this was good, but it really wasn't the most shocking news he had heard today. Euclid stated that the lady was actually missing something, presenting this information as a reason for relief, as if everything was as it should be. Herencia was sure that his words meant that she could now safely go to the Novelita estate without relying on his decisions. A sweet quarrel was growing between the young people, while the heroine was screaming what was going on, while the young man was sure that she would still return with him. Because in his opinion, in any other case it could not be otherwise. But the lady did not want some duke to rule her, and only smiled at his words. The Empress could send a new invitation at any moment, but the Duke insisted that the girl had fired the headmaid, which had caused significant damage, and didn't she know that the Gretelos house had not had a mistress for more than 20 years? In any case, he admitted that the ducal house definitely needed her, and that would probably be enough to change her mind. Hearing these words, Herencia felt her importance in this man's life and some incredible warmth inside. As soon as the Duke returned to the palace, he asked Sebastian to immediately bring his brothers to him for an important conversation. He walked angrily between the servants, and everyone understood that the Duke was definitely not in a good mood right now. Sebastian saw that the young lady did not return with him, and apparently something happened in the crime town. Sebastian ordered his assistant to go to Madame Toile's mansion and bring young Master Elbers, and also bring Master Evan from the arena. The butler really hoped that nothing serious had happened, but he was very worried that a huge scandal was growing in the family between all members. He just wanted to not worry about it, and he understood that in this situation he could not change anything, no matter how well he treated the lady. In the criminal town, Raisel stood by the window and celebrated his victory, because in one instant his plans changed dramatically. He was confident that he had definitely made a worthy decision, and was pleased with his power. Suddenly, he ordered his assistants to pack their things immediately, saying that they were heading to the capital right now. They were skilled thieves, and one of them asked if there was anything valuable in the capital that needed to be stolen. Recently, they stole the emperor's crown right from the palace, but this time the leader said that you don't joke with chained dogs, and they had other